could make this merger. Like, why don't we have factual data? But it's making our market so wacky.
Yeah.
And I mean, I get it, but I've said this for years. I feel like Oxford has no middle class. We have like the working poor students, poor people, and then people who aren't doing so bad. And then it's like the people in the middle. It's like they just can't afford to live here.
Yeah. No, it's very complicated. I mean, like my only real question was like in regard to the proposal, has research been like did these guys like researched all the other things?
I think they've done a lot.
A lot,
What
okay.
they've done. I personally like the idea of a mirror, because technically a hotel tax, like, hi Jason. Hey, what's going on? Not much. We had the whole discussion of the bed and breakfast and all that. I mean, and that actually has different insurance, legal liability implications than just let somebody crash at my house.
All right.
So I don't think
Doing
we
well.
should charge a hotel tax, but we could at least charge like a occupancy tax or
Yeah, and we talked.
It seems like you and I have the same
Yeah.
thoughts on the presidential thing, which may not
Oh,
come
yeah.
out the way.
Well, we don't know.
Do you think we can talk
because-
Michelle into it, please?
It's, I was really,
I really like her.
I don't think so, but yeah, I would.
Despite the fact that she doesn't want to run, like, whatever, it's not about you.
Hey, how's it going, Sean?
Very good.
I like that dress.
Thanks. It was donated. It came out of a
Usually a
bag.
high volume of clothes to,
What
I
did she
get
say
better
at one time?
eyes.
I was like, you said it one time, she's like, I get to pick things first.
yes,
I do.
sipping from the fire hose of textiles.
This was never
I'm
a
actually-
charitable endeavor. This was all about my wardrobe.
Yeah,
This was
you're so
my-
selfish, Sean.
I know.
Just
I really
don't
am.
understand.
I really am selfish.
Yeah, I could talk
did I
about that
just,
for a long time.
I know, I was,
No, there it is.
And I'm really
Good.
frustrated, and it's also hard to know because until he makes a decision to leave, he has to be leaving.
but that's
right?
it's
Well, I
hard
meant
for
in the
me.
sense of people, he seems to be becoming more vehement.
So
but-
technically, we should take old business before new business, but if we amend the agenda
Because
to reverse the order, I think that makes sense.
maybe I should.
Is that okay with you?
consider dropping out. You can't say that publicly, right?
It's also like, you get to expect
I mean, I would love to make Mike Rudolph listen to a text
to
of
go
it.
aside, it's like, okay, we're talking about presidential level politicians. And that's just not in
I
the
was
cards.
really hoping he would be able to, and maybe he still can. I think the pressure's gonna, I hope the
Wait,
pressure's
seriously?
because
Okay.
it's hard to know maybe for a fact, but the evidence suggests things aren't,
Well,
they're not
next
good,
time
and
somebody,
they're
not
unlikely
naming
to move
names,
in the
but their
right
initials are P,
direction by enough.
says that we don't meet,
Oh my God. I don't want
this,
to.
this is proof that
I
we
have
meet.
stuff to say about that, but I can't right now.
Open one of your cans of pop.
Sneak up me.
Oh, yeah.
If he did say he wasn't coming,
Jeff, didn't he?
definitely is not.
Yeah, I thought he was.
So, but normally Matt's on time, so I would say go ahead
Okay,
if you want to.
that works for me. Little table talk, does somebody wanna, when I do the acceptance of the agenda, does somebody wanna propose changing it to move new business before old business?
Sure.
Okay.
I can do that.
Okay. Either one, well, it looks like I got my first and my second.
Dave, you can, you know what, you say it better. And then I
I
and then
could
s-
really nail that.
You nail that.
I can really nail,
And
I'd
I'm
like
so
to make
good
a
at
motion
seconding it,
to
too.
accept with the following change. All right, ready to get this party started?
Yes.
All right, I will call the Tuesday, July 9th, 2024 Planning Commission meeting to order. I will entertain an approval of the agenda.
All right, I would move that we order new business before old business. Would modify the agenda to reorder items 6 and 7.
Second.
All right, I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Seeing none. I will now technically it passes for Annie's records. Approval of the minutes from May 14th, 2024.
I would move approval of the minutes from May 14th, 2024.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Webster with the second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Seeing none. At this time, we'll entertain public comments related to items that are not on tonight's agenda. So if anyone would like to talk about something that is not on the agenda, feel free to come up to the podium.
Seeing 0 of 6 people move, we will assume that there are no public comments related to non-agenda items. I will now move on to reports from commissions, boards, committees, and staff.
I have no report because we did not meet last month, whatever.
Perfect. Vice Chair Rosenberg.
I have no report because we didn't meet, except to acknowledge that a lot of the stuff that we're concerned about, like certain low-income communities and other housing issues, have definitely been talked about by city council, so that's super cool. But yeah, we have not met.
Perfect. Mr. Bracken.
I don't think I have anything super significant to speak on.
Okay.
So just kind of some reports. One of the reasons why the Climate Action Steering Committee hasn't met, we're trying to go through a transitional phase where we've been very, very busy for the last couple of years writing a climate action plan, and now it's a matter of how do we figure out how to implement it. And one of the things we're shifting to is we kind of met monthly or bi-monthly to get that work done. But for a variety of reasons, including staff limitations, we're shifting more towards a quarterly meeting schedule, but really focusing department by department to kind of talk about our climate action plans, our climate action goals, and the comprehensive plan, and kind of work as that board was intended to work, which is a high-level kind of coordination and steering. And so we're going to be meeting with different relevant department heads in upcoming meetings, and to talk about the climate-related goals in our climate action plan and our comprehensive plan and how we're going to move forward on them. So there's that. The Parking and Transportation Advisory Board, we didn't have an official meeting because we didn't have a quorum, but just a little bit of an update on what we've been working on is that one of the things that over the spring, the Parking and Transportation Advisory Board worked with a group of my students. I have some students who do a climate-based project. And one of the things we kind of gapped, we realized, is we've been doing all this great transportation planning focused on major corridors, and to be honest, kind of focused on bicycle safety as the primary thing. And we realized there are all these side streets that are low on the hierarchy, but pedestrians use them all the time. A good example of that is Walnut Street, you know. And so what the students did is a plan that kind of looked at some of the safety issues. Where do we have vehicular accidents? Where do we have pedestrian accidents? And then looking at best practices in kind of things like traffic calming and things like that. So it was a really good project. It helped us take a look at some of the things like we have stop signs in places and we're not sure why the stop signs are oriented the way they are, except for maybe they've always been that way for the last 100 years. And some of those things are fine, but some of those things are kind of like counterintuitive, like we're making it harder and less safe for pedestrians. Like if you've ever gone east-west on Walnut, you know what it's like, either as a car or a pedestrian. And so the project was really good and explored some best practices, and I really appreciate that staff, Sam has met with the city engineer to talk about which of these things we might be able to pilot. So planning related in the transportation sphere. And I guess those are the only two things I'll report on.
Perfect. For HAPC, we had to reschedule our meeting, and I'm trying to get the actual date because it didn't pop up with all of the other things that have, there we go. It'll be on Monday, the 15th at 6 in the municipal building. I'd say the biggest agenda item, and Mr. Perry will fill in any blanks that I miss, would be we have a revised concept plan from the bookstore property at the corner of High and Poplar that they had met with us last month, last meeting, I don't remember if it was last month, and sought feedback. So we're going to have that discussion, and I know I'm missing something else, but again, with the plethora of HAPC emails lately, I can't find the actual agenda, so I apologize for that. Mr. Perry?
Thank you. There is one pre-application for a single house as well.
That's
So,
right.
Yeah, on the South College. As far as staff updates, we are excited to bring a recommendation to council next week for a development code consultant. The company is called McKenna Associates out of Northville, Michigan. We had a selection committee of 7 members who reviewed 6 proposals a couple months ago, over the past couple months, and landed on McKenna. We were so impressed with their proposal that we invited them to also submit a proposal for historic preservation plan and design guidelines, which they did not submit in the original proposal. And so we're going to be recommending them to city council, and this will be zoning code, subdivision code, historic preservation plan, and historic district design guidelines. So really big project. The zoning code hasn't been holistically updated for over 20 years. So it's going to be really big. Following the comprehensive plan in early 2023, the adoption of that, this is a good time to revisit those goals in a regulatory and a policy way. And then other news recently is we got notice of a funding award that will be coming through the state capital budget through House Bill 2 for a portion of the Oxford Area Trail Phase 5, the railroad bridge over to the high school. So we're excited about that, $800,000. So that will help with the levy dollars go a lot farther on the project. So we're excited about that. And that's all I've got tonight.
Perfect, thank you.
I want to thank Sam. I think Sam kind of took the lead on communicating with our legislators on that capital appropriation. And I think in terms of investment of time in return, it was one of the best investment of times. I mean, $800,000 for, how long was the application? It was like a relatively short
2
application.
pages and a couple meetings and.
But it's
Sarah
finding those
Carruthers,
opportunities and
yeah.
seeking them out. I mean,
So less than a week's
$800,000.
worth of work, $800,000.
Well, the first phase of the trail between the grant and the local match was less than that, you know, so the numbers have gotten bigger, and so thanks, Sam.
You're welcome.
Perfect. All right, moving on to new business. PC 2024-05, 5500 College Quarter Pike, conditional use for a dog training facility. Scott Webb is the architect, applicant, and agent, and Mr. Perry will mosey up to the podium while one of you fine folks makes a motion to adjourn to public hearing.
I would make a motion, we return to public hearing on PC 2024-05.
Dr. Prithridge with the motion. Do I have a second? And Vice Chair Rosenberg with the second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? All right, Mr. Perry.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning Commission. We have a request from architect Scott Webb on behalf of business owner Jeff Silverman to utilize an existing building at 5500 College Corner Pike. You may know this property as, historically, it was the planning forum. It was a daycare for a short time a few years ago. It's been vacant a lot over the past decade, so we were glad to see a potential use for this. The zoning code has an allowance for a kennel as a conditional use. The proposal is not directly a kennel, but according to the zoning code, the zoning administrator is allowed to make an interpretation of a similar use. And so that is what we have done here, and they were accepting of submitting a conditional use application, which is what you have in front of you. And so, get it on the screen, there we go. It's an acre property, and you can see it's just to the south of the strip mall that's adjacent to Walmart there, where there was a furniture business. And the building sets back fairly far from the property. In a way, it's actually kind of ideal for the proposed use because of the spacing that from surrounding uses. For the potential that there may be concerns of any types of nuisance. And let me back up a little bit too and talk about what the purpose of the conditional use is. The purpose of the conditional use process is not to prohibit or prevent a use, but it's to look at it to see if there's any potential nuisances, and if there are, to mitigate them. And so that's what this hearing is about, to collect any new information, make a recommendation to City Council as to the appropriateness of it in the particular location. The zoning of the property is general business, or GB, for the majority of the area. You can see on the map the label for Holiday Inn, which will be breaking ground soon. Just to the south, there's an aerial shot of the property looking to the north. You can see the boundary of the property. There are actually 2 parcels there, but the yellow highlight shows the general boundary. And And then another view from the west. You can see it's a one-story building, fairly low, open yard area, connected by an existing driveway and a parking area in the rear. And here, Mr. Moore, who's city planner, is not able to attend tonight, always makes these nice slides for me, so I can benefit from that. And this is the site plan that's overlaid on the aerial photo. You can kind of get an idea of the site conditions of the building, of the shrubbery and trees and the parking that's in the rear. You can see, I'll draw your attention to on the site plan also, there is a sketch for a proposed connecting sidewalk, which is a requirement of the code when there's a use change to have a connecting pedestrian path. And there's a closer up view of those features. We did have in our analysis a suggestion for a walkway location that would be more separated. However, upon further review, we realized that it would cause some requirements of altering the existing wood fence there that was put up as part of the shared use path. So we're working with Mr. Webb on an alternative location, which is actually their proposed location, and some changes to it which would help to separate the pedestrian access from the vehicular access in a safe way, which is the intent of the code. And then highlighting also on the upper right of the screen there, the dog run enclosure that's proposed. There's an existing freestanding fence which would be replaced, sign, which would be replaced with a new sign for the business. The business is Training Tracks, which is an existing business in College Corner that would be relocating to this property. Floor plan of the building. And our recommended conditions. And there's, like I said before, there are two parcels that are recommended to be consolidated. It's a zoning nonconformity because of the parking requires setbacks. Other than that, it's not causing an issue necessarily. There's not new construction proposed, but we would like to have that cleaned up to remove that nonconformity. And because of the location in a high visibility area, our recommendation is also to utilize a fence that is some type of a 3-board wooden fence or something similar to that, that would have also the screening for containing the dogs. And then we would like to remove this condition number 3. We don't believe that it's necessary. There would be a way to still accomplish the intent of the code by having a separated path while not requiring that the wooden fence along the shared use path be altered in order to have the walkway. So our plan is to work with Mr. Webb on that. And then as far as potential nuisance, we have a recommended condition, which we believe is accepted by the applicant, to have on-site overnight boarding, indoors only, limited to 8 dogs at a time, contingent on staff supervision. I don't think that's their initial plan to get started, but we would like to have that in there because of potential nuisance. Like I said, this isn't a good property for this because of the spacing from the surrounding properties. It's over 1,000 feet to the nearest residential area, so there is pretty good spacing there. And we do believe that it meets with the conditions, it does meet the general intent of the zoning code, and our findings are that it can be recommended to City Council, and you'll see the details of that in the staff report. Happy to answer any questions or go back to any of the site drawings. Mr. Webb is here as well and has some slides too if you have any questions for him. I'd be happy to answer anything if you have any.
Just clarification, the piece of land that is parallel to 27 that says City of Oxford, is that just a strange vestige of something that
Yes.
happened before?
So when the city did the right-of-way acquisition, it did not do right-of-way dedication plats, which still needs to be done. That's a recommendation I've made to city staff more than once. So what it ends up with is these stray parcels of land that are publicly owned, but they're not part of the road right-of-way. So they're adjacent to it, so they're not privately owned.
Right.
So who maintains them?
They're maintained by the adjacent property owner.
Okay.
Yeah. It's treated like right-of-way.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
essentially what it is.
So where I was going with this is, I don't think it's a requirement, but it would be great to have trees along that right-of-way. But you're saying that in fact, if that were to happen, it would be the city of Oxford that would need to create a tree.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. If this was new construction or if the parking was going to be expanded, then they would be required to
Then we
plant
would
some new trees.
require, okay, got it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mhm. Good question.
And could I just a little bit more clarification on if we remove condition 3, you feel like the existing site plans are sufficient to have
Yes.
that administrative conversation?
Yeah, the
Okay.
only change I would make, and I was just speaking with Mr. Webb prior to the meeting, would be to require that the walkway be elevated.
Okay.
Like a curb, and actually put it adjacent to the driveway.
Okay.
So that there would be no confusion about if the driveway was to ever be expanded, it wouldn't just kind of blend right into the sidewalk. It would be elevated, and it would be that way from the beginning, so there wouldn't be any confusion about that. I don't think that needs to be legislated through a condition. I think we can just use the site plan that's already there, make an administrative change whenever the.
Because the underlying code says what the intent should be.
Right.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep.
I was just wondering what the existing fence in the back was for, if we know anything about that.
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that. It may have been part of the daycare, but I don't have any history on that.
Thanks.
We did get one public comment, which I neglected to mention in my verbal report. It's in the staff report, and it's in the attachments as well. There was a Ms. Ramsey who submitted a comment about encroachment of an existing fence. And so we did pass that along to Mr. Webb, and I assume they'll pass that along to the owner or the applicant. That's not something that the city would be involved in, but if it was related to this particular use, that would be something that we would be involved in, but I don't believe that it is.
Any other questions for Mr. Perry? If not, Mr. Webb, it's your turn.
Should be up there. I think Glenn has to switch it. Which he'll do it soon, if he's listening. There we go.
You don't want to look at the commission fivefold?
Shadow. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission. As Sam pointed out, I'm here tonight representing Jeff Silverman and his Training Tracks business. And we're looking at me again. There we go. So I thought I would take a minute. If you have more specific questions about the business, Jeff could certainly answer it. But as I do when I work with new businesses, you get to learn about what they're about a little bit. And so interestingly, this first and foremost is not a kennel. This is a training facility with lots and lots of staff. They do board dogs a little bit overnight. They do a little dog daycare in coordination with the training that they do. And everything happens inside. The fenced yard that we're proposing is for walking, not kennels, not dogs stored outside or anything like that. So, scroll wheel's going too fast. Okay. So you saw the floor plan. I kind of blew some things up here just to sort of show you kind of what goes on in here. So they have like a mock living room training area, keep the dogs off the couches, keep them off the tables, things like that. They have a mock dining room, a mock kitchen. So this is, even though it's a pretty good sized building, the intention is not to warehouse animals here. That's not the business plan as it is. As you saw from the site plan, and we'll come back to that, the existing business from the daycare, and maybe as far as I know back to the planning forum, has always had the parking in the rear and the entrance in the rear, even though it has that porch on the front. So while we understand the necessity of the code to put this sidewalk in, It is just simply an expense for something that'll, not be used by my client, but nonetheless, we're willing to meet partway, and we appreciate staff's consideration on that. Sorry. So, kind of as the site plan shows there, to start with, I believe that we also meet the decision standards and the specific use concerns as far as the conditional use goes. So really, what I'd like to talk about tonight are the 4 conditions as staff has put them out there. So the first one is the lot consolidation. And while I understand that whenever we have conditional uses or building permits, it's an opportunity for the city to kind of clean up its record, it is just simply an expense to this client that is really not anything to do with his business. It would have to be presumably done by the property owner and recorded. His lease is for both parcels. These buildings have stood on both parcels since their construction in the late 60s, early 70s. So, we would just like you to consider perhaps just the purpose of the expense of just filing a lot consolidation. But we will take the recommendation as you directed. So, and for what it's worth, as Sam pointed out, this building has been vacant off and on for a long time. The last use was also a conditional use as a daycare, and none of these things were required for the last conditional use. And so, for my client, he's just kind of incurring some expense that maybe hasn't been necessary for previous occupants. So to that end, staff recommendation 2, new fencing installed on the site shall be aesthetically pleasing. So the dog run is not phase 1, so to speak. That's something that we have labeled as the future, but nonetheless, Jeff is more than comfortable working with staff to come up with a fence that is aesthetically pleasing at the back of the building here. He did point out the 3-board fence is probably not the answer because dogs climb it, and maybe that's something he needs to train them not to do. But and then so then kind of revisiting this portion that the proposals will continue to use the existing entrance at the rear of the building, as you sort of saw from my floor plan. There's really no intention. That's a training room, what was once perhaps a living room, if this was a house at one time. So that will not be the entrance. It's not adjacent to the parking. It's really not going to be the entrance, like I said, as it ever has been. So to that end, just to kind of remind you in general, planning always likes to see lots of parking in the back of the buildings and very little out front. So we have a situation where all of our parking is in the back of the building, therefore the entrance is in the back of the building, and now we're going to put a sidewalk out to the door that no one uses, but nonetheless, it is what it is. I appreciate, I guess Sam took a look at our slide, and in addition to the expense of putting in a sidewalk where Zach had recommended to put it straight from the front door out to here, it would cause us to have to cut through this existing fence, make modifications to that. What we had proposed was simply to kind of put it along the edge of the sidewalk. I think Sam's concern is valid that this little area that I left white here, if we're not literally against the sidewalk, that's going to turn out to be some gravel or crappy bushes until they disappear and just becomes more driveway. So I think moving it up against the driveway is perfectly fine, and putting an edge on it so it's a curb, will be fine. So we're happy to do that as we go along. So we appreciate staff working with us on that one. We can go through the specific concerns. They're more specific to actual clinics and kennels. As I said, it's not a kennel, so the concerns about numbers of dogs or numbers of staff are not really germane in this particular case. Outdoor pens are not permitted. The outdoor fencing area that we're talking about here is to be used for training. Again, it's not an outdoor pen. All the activity will be outdoor training of dogs, not running or warehousing. So, and staff's final condition of no more than 8 dogs at a time, we actually put that in our application as part of how this business runs, just to assure you that we're not bait and switch here, that we're going to tell you we're not a kennel and then 30 dogs are spending the night. So the 8 dogs is completely fine. That was in Jeff's original proposal, and so we're comfortable with that as well. So decision standards, I think we meet them and would appreciate your consideration tonight. Happy to answer any questions. And Jeff's here if you have questions about the operation of the business.
Dr. Berthrick.
Can I ask a question then? I was trying to look back on our code and what it requires in terms of the sidewalk, and I think it probably talks about principal entrance, and we're saying, but if people are walking in the back door, ought there not be a sidewalk connection to what's effectively the principal entrance?
That's what I was thinking.
You know, that, yes, you already have a sidewalk to the front door that no one uses, but I guess my question is if the intent of the code is to provide a pedestrian access to the entrance of the facility, is there any, and I'm presuming that the one along the driveway may be less expensive than the one that was proposed for the full length. I guess chew on whether going to where a person would actually walk their dog into the back door of the place would actually be feasible or functional.
That's one of the conflicts that we have in the zoning code where we're required to have the principal entrance facing the street.
Yeah.
Our sidewalk code is written for that principal entrance. The fact that the actual usable, practical entrance is the rear doesn't really change the code requirement.
But in terms of the spirit of the code is to provide a pedestrian-friendly access to the facility. If your functional entrance is the back door, do you see a problem with extending the adjacent sidewalk to reach the door where people would actually enter?
Yeah, we can take a look at that. There's a landscape bed along that side, and I'm not sure I have a picture of it here tonight, but, yeah, I mean, we might be able to put another little piece kind of along there. So maybe have to compromise the landscape a little bit, but.
So not something you need to design on the fly, but just thinking that's the spirit of the code to provide that access. So thank you.
Can I just add one point to that? That main door.
If you could you come up with the podium?
Yeah.
We can hear you, the microphone can't.
So that front door that we were proposing the sidewalk going to, that would be the entrance for people attending our group classes.
Okay.
The vast majority of people, pretty much everyone coming to our business for anything other than a group class is bringing dog beds, food, things like that. Our day school and board and train clients, it's not really feasible that they're gonna be walking. The only people I can imagine walking are our group class students. And that room that door goes into is going to be our group class classroom. So while it won't be the primary day-to-day entrance, I think if anybody was to walk up as a pedestrian, odds are they're gonna be coming for a group class and they will be using that entrance.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? I don't see any. Mr. Webb, do you have anything to?
Oh, I did have one more thing. Yeah, so the Ramsey family, part of the Day family, I've worked with them for years. So Judy called me, Steve called me back and said that he was out there. He knows where those pins are out here somewhere. He says he can see them and he can cite them, and he feels that this old fence is over the property line. And so I spoke to Jeff about it, and if that's the case, if we can see those pins, maybe now's the time to take care of that. So we're working that out with the Ramseys. I just didn't want you to think we ignored their concerns.
Nope, didn't think that, but I appreciate the clarification. All right, are there any members of the public who would like to share their thoughts on this? Again, batting 0 for 4, because 2 people have already been up here. I will make a
Motion to close
Thank
public
you.
hearing. It was the PC 2405 or something. I can't remember what the number is.
You were always going with that one.
Okay.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Bracken with the second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Seeing none, it passes. All right. Who wants to kick us off?
I do.
Vice Chair Rosenberg.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this conditional use makes a lot of sense to pass. Training Tracks is a business that our community already knows, trusts, and it's an important part of the community because it helps us with our dogs, keeping each other safe. Plus, it will bring their successful business from College Corner, Ohio, to the city of Oxford. So I also want to just say that I have personal knowledge that the kennel situation is certainly not a problem. I don't know that anyone ever thought that that was going to be the case, but yeah, there is a training program that is overnight, but it is not a kennel situation. So I'm just really positive about this. I like the plans. I like that there's so much space. I like that, you know, it seems like ready-made for a dog training business, to be really honest. And this building has been falling apart and practically empty for a while. So, supportive.
Any other comments, observations? I have a couple comments, but.
Yeah, I mean, I would just piggyback. I mean, I think the thing is it's interesting with these conditional uses because we have to kind of anticipate what the potential negative consequences would be, because they're not all spelled out in the code. So we have to imagine what a facility would be like that. And I think the conversations between staff and the applicant have like struck a really nice, reasonable middle ground. And I would say that like I'm not part of the dog world, but to the degree that I'm familiar with this business, there's just a ton of respect for the way this business is operated. So yeah, that putting what we think about as a kennel, you know, relative to this business is just not even in that same realm, because it just seems, from my secondhand impression, to be a very thoughtful, very, very thoughtful, careful. But if we're approving a conditional use, that is transferable. And so we do have to imagine, you know, this is a facility operated by somebody other than this person's, you know? So, but from that point of view, I think it anticipates any of the concerns that would be, you know, there is, yeah, this is not a kennel, there's no outdoor storage of animals. And so, yeah, I think it hits on all the things, and I appreciate them. I guess the questions, you know, coming back to, and I'm fine with the relocation of the sidewalk, and I don't think we need a condition about it, but I think the idea of what the spirit and the letter of that portion of the code is to provide pedestrian access, ADA access to facilities. And I can imagine that employees will walk to the facility and people may walk their dogs. And so I think that thinking about the functionality of the building, you know, my hope is, so if it's as depicted here, I think ideally it'd be really nice if the sidewalk were extended to the back so people could reach either entrance from a sidewalk adjacent to, and compared to what was initially requested, it seems like the linear foot of sidewalk's a lot less. But I don't think it necessitates a condition. I don't know what to say about the lot consolidation. I mean, I think we have our standards, and I feel like we are, it seems like in recent cases, we've been relatively consistent with asking for that. But I wonder if
when there's a building, a new building being built.
Yeah.
It's been very consistent, or a
Yeah.
building being added onto. In this case, there are building improvements being done, but they're all internal, so there's really, you know, I could go either way.
So I guess the question is, could we live with them not consolidating? Are there consequences, material consequences in the short to medium term of not consolidating?
No.
Okay.
But we also have existing non-new construction where we've had lot consolidation or the expectation for it. I'm just thinking of some of the uptown consolidations where there's very bizarre property lines that go through the middle of the living room.
Well, and from that point of view, I mean, I'm a rule follower, but if it could go either way, in the spirit of economic development, I think for a small business owner, that could be, I mean, those costs are not probably insignificant. They probably involve surveying and things like that. So, you know, if other people, we'll get around to motions, but
Sure.
I might make a motion to see if there's a second on the condition about the lot consolidation.
You can do a straw poll if you want. That's the beauty of how we run.
Well, I think either way we can do it. I mean, I think when we get to making the motions, it's, again, if I make a motion, nobody else supports it, then it just dies.
Fair point.
And if there's a second but not support, it would die again. So, yeah, I'm curious in conversation to hear what other people think about that.
I have a question about it, actually. Like, why would the business owner be responsible rather than the property owner for a consolidation?
It's not necessarily that the city is picking on the business owner. It's because an application is being submitted for a change of use that requires a conditional use. So sometimes the tenant will pass on costs to the owner, you know, as part of, we have to make this happen in order for this, you know, to go forward. But if nothing was happening, it was sitting there vacant, the city would not be asking the owner to do that.
Okay.
But because there's an application,
Yeah.
that's where that
Yeah.
came from.
Well, then, so you're not doing a straw poll, but supportive. So,
Ms. Webster?
Yeah, I agree that the consolidation might be waived. In my opinion, it's not essential.
Thoughts? I mean, in general.
No.
So, to quote Dr. Prithridge, somebody's got to build the first sidewalk. So, as a matter of practice and principle, I don't ever want to incur additional or cost prohibitive measures on anyone, but at the same time, and I forgot who the quote is, it's also not our job, responsibility, or position to help or hinder any businesses in the town. We're supposed to look at things fairly and equally. Personally, I'm indifferent, but at the same time, I know we do a lot, and maybe I see more of it because we do a lot of lot consolidations and things administratively, so maybe that's probably why it weighs a little more on me. It's not a deal breaker for me, but I think, you know, measure twice, cut once. I agree with Dr. Prithridge on the sidewalk. And again, it's more of the anticipation of potential uses. Because this does fall under conditional use with the kennels, we do want to make sure that we're seeing all potential uses. Because, and I saw it as a positive. I saw it as, like, if they ever could expand, I'm a dog person, if they ever did expand their business, this allows them the flexibility without having to come back and, you know, hey, by the way, now we want to do this, or, you know, so I like building in that flexibility for them. I don't believe we need a condition if the code allows for the walkway, and staff and Mr. Webb. I think they're very much on the same page, and again, cost prohibitive. I think you and I are both, if it's gonna be extensive expense to get a sidewalk to the back versus the front, or whatever the case may be, I think staff has code to guide what's logical. So, other than that, I mean, again, I think this is great. It's a good business. As a dog owner, I think it's a good addition, and actually a beautiful marriage of the property and the use. So, yeah, just my peanut gallery thoughts.
And just a final thought about the sidewalk. I think people often think about the customer, but you know, imagine there are employees here. Maybe it's a one-person show, but you may have people who might be riding their bicycle or walking out to the facility, and thinking about that range of things can help justify why you build a sidewalk in the first place. All right, so.
So I hear a semicolon making a motion here.
Well, let's start with the motion to approve on PC 2024-05. Do we need to make them?
If you make the
motion a
motion-
second, and then we can do amendments, or?
No, if you can make a motion with alterations to the conditions and changes.
Okay, if I can recall then, with the deletion of condition 3, and what was the lot consolidation?
That was number 1.
That was 1, and we probably should vote on them separately, so how do we?
No, you can make a motion together.
But if people like one motion, in any way, if people like one and not the other.
I'm willing to take that chance.
Yeah, let's give it a try.
Yeah, I think we can.
Okay, all right. So then what was the I'm zooming forward to look at the.
I don't know how much more clear hints I could have given.
Okay, yeah. So what was the condition on lot consolidation? I'm trying to zoom through my packet here.
That was number 1.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
page 23.
So
Okay,
what I
there you
hear
go,
is
thank
you'd
you.
like to make a motion to approve striking staff recommendations 1 and 3 as specific conditions,
Yes.
but with the intent that staff and the applicant will find an amicable and code appropriate solution for the sidewalk.
Yes, which I don't, yeah.
All right, is that fair and understood? Do I have a second?
Second.
Vice Chair Rosenberg with the eager second.
So the last question I have is, I think that.
Technically, you can't have a question now. There's a motion
Well,
and a
yeah, I can have
second.
conversation.
But I'm going to
We've
be a
got
nice
motion-
guy.
We can have discussion, right? I mean, we can have discussion on the motion in
Yeah.
a second.
We'll let you have it.
well, we can have discussion on a motion in a second, right? It's not closed for conversation, is it?
He's yes.
I mean, yeah, the answer is yes.
Okay. So again, I think that the question about the sidewalk connection to the rear entrance is not going to be covered by the code, because the code probably says principal entrance, which presumes the front door. So the final thing is just if the applicant could decide not to do the connection to the back door, and there's no code mandate for that. So the question is, if we thought that was important, then that could be a modified condition, and if not, we just hope the conversation goes the way we like.
I hear you clarifying the original motion to make sure it's understood when our minutes are created.
You seem like you want to say something, either. Yes.
I do.
Okay.
Is it
Mr.
okay?
Perry, yes.
I would recommend, based on the consensus that I'm hearing, of striking 1 and 3, and then I can work with Mr. Webb on a revised condition 3 that would accomplish the spirit of what you're after.
Okay.
For council.
Okay, great,
That way
perfect.
we're not trying to
Perfect.
do that, slice and dice that tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to get that lost, because it's not a compliance thing, but it's a spirit thing,
Sure.
probably, so.
Yeah.
Do you have any concerns with removing number 1?
No.
That I'm not thinking of?
No.
Didn't think so, wanted to check, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, it's motion and a second. A little bit of discussion. Any other discussion? All right, Mr. Perry, we call the roll?
Yes. Ms. Webster?
So this is,
This is to approve
yes.
with the 2 conditions removed.
Yes.
Okay? Mr. Prithridge?
Yes.
Mr. Bracken?
Yes.
Mix Rosenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Watt?
Yes. All right, motion passes. I appreciate that, Mr.
Thank you.
Webb. All right, and on to flipping a page. PC 2024-06, South Farm Section 4, preliminary and final plan development. 25 single-family lots, JA Development, care of Christo, applicant and agent. And we will gladly entertain a motion to adjourn to public
I
hearing.
move we enter into public hearing on PC 2024-06. And are we going to do these separately or together?
Together.
Okay, to move into public hearing on PC 2024-06 and PC 2024-07.
Thank you, Dr. Prithridge. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Mr. Perry?
Okay. Thank you. This property that is being reviewed tonight may look familiar to some of you. I think this is probably the 5th time over the past few years that it's been in front of Planning Commission and Council for one aspect or another, either subdivision or planned development. I'll leave this slide up there, just so you can see the names. The previous developer that we had in front of us is John Boyle and Mike Shea with South Farm Development LLC. We have worked with them off and on for several years, didn't end up working out. They still are the owners. A new potential developer, Joe Christo, JA Development, is looking to possibly take this development over, make some changes to it. Because of how many times it's been in front of the Planning Commission and City Council, Mr. Moore and our suggestion was to actually combine these reviews together, preliminary, final, and subdivision as kind of one presentation. Many of the aspects of reviewing a potential change for really changing a undeveloped area to a developed area is looking at what are the conditions of the property and the surrounding property. And somewhat similar to the conditional use, is this an appropriate or suitable use of the land that's proposed, in this case for 25 homes? And if it is, what are the things that need to be evaluated as far as what's being affected from a natural resources standpoint, historic standpoint, utilities, streets, those types of things. All of that has been done so many times before, so we're trying to consolidate that down into one presentation and review. There have been a couple changes with the proposal that Same engineer, Bear Becker, John Bear. Property is zoned R1B. It's not quite 7 acres. So single-family, medium-density residential. It's adjacent to existing residential development and a church, Cobblestone Community Church. So the existing residential development is Morgan Circle off of Roberts Drive, which is off of Kerr Road. And I always say that because many people don't know about these small streets on the south side of town. You may remember from previous discussions, and actually I'll give you a little bit of a context here of surrounding properties. There's another development, Heron Pond, which you've seen before, that's been approved, actually getting ready to break ground soon, we believe. That's just between Cobblestone Community Church, the pond, and Kerr Road. And then we have the existing South Farm development with the existing homes. And then there are actually 13 lots that are already in existence, but there's no street. And so it's a little bit unusual to have platted lots with no street. Hoover Drive was the street that was platted back many years ago, and but it did not get built as part of the development. And then Cobblestone Community Church, which has sold off some of the land over the recent years, is still retaining much of the land to the west, along with the church and the parking lot, and an area where the Oxford Area Trail will be going through in the future, crossing through that property. And then to the south is the Talawanda School District property, which actually has a roadway easement on it, which we'll talk more about. Zoning R1B, so you can see that entire area. And then off to the east, across Kerr Road, ag open space, which is a holding zone. It's not intended to be ag forever, but it's a holding zone until future use development is proposed. And then from the comprehensive plan, we've overlaid that as well. Urban neighborhood, so intended to have connectivity and somewhat dense development. And then suburban neighborhood is the area that is existing there. So the goal is for new residential to be urbanized. You've seen these slides before, those of you that have been on the commission. So the South Farm preliminary plan envisioned 186 single-family lots. Obviously that didn't happen because much of the land was not developed. And you can see how that first section was done, platted in 1992. And then another section was platted later. And then we have the conditional use from the church. And then a amendment to remove the lots where the church was to be built. And then the original South Farm Section 4, which really, based on feedback from staff, the developer was very open to trying something that would be more dense to help to diversify housing stock. So we were really appreciative of that in its presentation to planning and council. And the proposed development, I'll show Heron Pond here as well. That was revised also to more of an alternative that is more traditional for 8 lots, larger lots. And then the 13 lots are still there. And then I mentioned the roadway easement that the city gained as part of negotiation from another deed. There were several easements obtained at the same time. This was one of them for a potential extension of Booth Road in the future, going all the way across the Talawanda property. It's an 82-foot wide roadway easement. And then the Oxford Area Trail, which is finishing up on design and hopefully will be under construction here within the next year or two. You can see going along Roberts Drive and then through the Cobblestone Community Church property. We really see that as an asset with the development of this area to have better connectivity, because the south side of town, Kerr Road, is somewhat unconnected because of the topography and the existing roadways. Aerial photo showing the existing layout, and then the most recently approved plan, which did not get recorded or built, but you can see the density and of the 25 lots, and pay particular attention to the rear alleyway that is shown on the west. And then the new proposed does not have the rear alleyway, but does have the same number of lots. And instead of the alleyway, it has a small portion of Booth Road, which was a request that staff made to the developer to accomplish two things. One is to start to introduce the concept of connectivity for a potential Booth Road connection in the future, utilizing that existing easement. One of the hardest things to do with residential development that happens as slow as it does in Oxford is to let people know that there will be connection in the future, whether it's a trail or a roadway of some kind. It's difficult for someone to have invested in a property or a neighborhood and sit for many, many years, and then the change happen later. So two things. The other thing that would be accomplished with this is to have a turnaround for service vehicles, fire trucks, large vehicles that would not require backing into driveways. So we have an opportunity here to accomplish that we have not had in some places where there have been developments with small dead-end streets that do not have turnarounds. And so this would accomplish that purpose as well, particularly because there would not be an alleyway, which was one of the ways that would accomplish that route through the development. This is a close-up showing the future collector roadway. The proposal is not to actually build that section that would connect to Booth Road at this point, but it would show that it would connect in the future. And as you might see, if you looked at the staff report, we even had a condition recommending that the road name would be there as well, showing that potential future connectivity. This is another change. Oh, actually, let me back up just a little bit. The proposal, the most recent proposal actually has a narrower street, which matches the width of Lake Forest Drive and also the South Forest Edge development. So if you remember the South Point area from 27 South and connecting to South Point Parkway, there's a new residential development on the south side of Lake Forest Drive that was approved. It has 28-foot wide streets. And then Lake Forest Drive itself is also a 28-foot wide street. And so what was proposed with this development by Mr. Baer and Mr. Christo was to do that same thing with a narrower street, save some on pavement from the standpoint of cost. Building infrastructure for residential development is costly, like anything else. Also to lessen the amount of environmental impact from materials and reflectivity, stormwater, so it accomplishes those purposes. This is a city engineer allowance. This is not something the planning commission has to waive the street width. Although I will say that one thing this does do that has a related effect is the availability of vehicular parking, because the width of the street is related to the allowance of parking. And the inherent allowance of passage of larger vehicles. So that's a discussion point that will happen with the city manager, police department, city engineer, if there needs to be regulations related to whether on-street parking will be allowed or not. Originally, when we first drafted the staff report, we had a condition in there of restricting that, but because it's fully within the authority of the city manager to do that, we felt like it was better to remove that condition and take it out of the purview of the planning commission and city council, and let that be something that, but actually by charter, the city manager has the authority to do that. Now, we do have other streets that are 28-foot wide, but those do not have driveways connected to them. So this would be something that could change. There could be a restriction at the beginning, and maybe it could be removed, or vice versa, depending on what the needs are. Another change is the type of dwelling. We had a lot of back and forth conversations, really good conversations with Mr. Christo and Mr. Baer about the type of dwelling unit. Our recommendation was to make a best effort at diversifying our housing stock, offering a unit that would be something that we don't have a lot of now, something that would have a homeowner association, which would lessen the amount of maintenance that would be needed, would be connected to the community, and would not be a typical 2,000, 3,000 square foot home. And along with that comes the original design that we saw was larger garages, because we typically see 2-car garages. And if you remember the feedback from the concept plan, those of you that were here for that, was it's very garage heavy. Small house, large garage, it kind of takes a little bit away from the presence, kind of the human aspect to a neighborhood. So that, I think that feedback was helpful. We did some back and forth with the developer, and they come up with a couple concepts that they believe will work, that only have a one-car garage. But Mr. Christo believes that by having something that has some consistency to it within the development, it will be more straightforward for them from a standpoint of marketing and construction. So here is one slide that shows a one-story building with a one-car garage, and then the next one shows a two-story. Along with that, in order to lessen the amount of garage presence, which those driveways would be cutting across sidewalks or vice versa, we did some research, Mr. Moore did, I should say, on looking at these types of developments where there are smaller houses that are not as traditional from a suburban standpoint. And we found some that had shared driveways, and actually that's Heron Pond will have the same thing, and you may be familiar with that on Brookville Road as well, if you're on the way out to the community park. So it's not a new thing for Oxford, but the size home would be. So the shared driveway would really help with giving more awareness to the pedestrian about where those crossing points will be. Although it's not high trip generation, it's still another conflict point, and so they were open to that as well. And so from the site plan, actually I don't think I have a slide for that, but there is, it's in the packet showing shared driveways for the homes. And then those garages would then be abutting each other.
So I'm sorry, Sam, so it looks like, is the driveway apron shared, but the driveways may be separate?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Question time.
And then I want to stress too that this is a review of two things, the subdivision and the plan development, because the R1B district requires certain lot sizes, lot coverages, and those are not in compliance with the underlying R1B code. However, through the plan development process, those can be waived or adjusted. The other thing that is being presented is a subdivision. In order to sell land, lots have to be divided and split in order to be transferred to new owners. So it's actually two things under one presentation, one review. We do have 14 recommended conditions, which I do not have on the slides, but you have in your staff report. And I'll skim through those very quickly. We do find that it satisfies the plan development and the subdivision general decision standards have been satisfied. The size and the shape of site are sufficient for the proposed use. And we have a condition regarding, the first one regarding the one-car garages, and the intent is to not have excessive width on the street frontage. However, we have the sketches, we have the renderings that are proposed, so we have it in the record, but we also believe that a condition would be helpful. As far as the variety of architecture, we have a condition too that talks about the roof style, the exterior materials, and the arrangement of doors and windows with variety. Our belief is that this would be a single-phase development, so all of the development would be happening at the same time, not necessarily all the houses at the same time, but that we wouldn't be seeing a long period of time between the homes. We also have a condition for lighting, for aesthetics as well, a variety of porch sizes. I mentioned the Booth Road signage. We have a condition about the construction of the trail. Similar to Owl's Landing, if you recall that project, it just so happened that the developer was proposing a development at the same time the city was designing the multi-use path along Brookville Road, which you see is constructed now. And so condition 5 is about the timing of that. If it's not complete, then the city would be able to use financial security if it saw fit to complete that. Hopefully, the completion of that would be coordinated and there would not be any delays. We also have an open space that is protected. It's shown on the plat. There's also a water quality basin that would be maintained by the HOA. And then we have a recommendation for a waiver on the allowable lot coverage to be increased from 40% to 65%. And the maximum front yard coverage set at 50%, which would not require a waiver. Front yard setbacks would be reduced as well from 30 feet to 20 feet, as well as proposed 3-foot and 5-foot minimums respectively are integral to the proposed planned development. And then as far as emergency service access to the rear, because of the proximity, in response to Mr. John Dethridge's comments, the fire chief, regarding access, one of the comments that we learned from a development in Indiana was they consolidated their mechanicals to pair them so that there would be the most access possible between the homes. That way, if there was emergency access needed, we would have the air conditioning units, electric meters, gas meters, all of those types of things mirrored between two houses. And then on the other gap between houses, there would not be those items. The idea being is to try to maximize access and make it as predictable as possible for those personnel that may need to access the rear. Since in this case, there would not be an alley in the rear. And then the other aspect would be to require gates if there are fences. And then as far as condition 12, there's a waiver to the development for the number of entrances onto a street. And this would be because there is only one street at this point. And our recommendation is to not have the full extension of Booth Road as part of this development, but only to have the stub for the turnaround. Then we have the HOA documents requirement to be reviewed, and then the validity of 5 years, which has been a consistent requirement that we have had for planned developments. Fire chief is here tonight, and I know may get questions about access and turnaround. And so I just wanted to have him here, and he was available in case anyone had any questions.
Chief's welcome to come up now. As a city staff member, I see him as part of this part of the agenda. How you doing, sir?
I'm good, how are you?
Not too bad. If there's anything you would like to share or kind of not present, but kick off the conversation, I think that would be helpful.
I think all my concerns were in the documents that were presented. If you guys have questions, I'm more than happy to work through that stuff with you. You know, as usual, I'm just trying to keep people's stuff from burning down. So, make it as easy as we can to serve everybody we need to with the limited staff that we have.
So the question is you have your concerns, and to what degree do you feel like the concerns were answered in this proposal here, and what things are you still concerned about, if anything?
You know, anytime that there's buildings that are this close together, I'm concerned. And lack of access to the backyard, you know, it's tough when you're trying to carry ladders and that type of thing to get to the back of a building. From the plans that I saw for these houses, there's gonna be a bedroom, I believe, on the back of both the single-story and the two-story, that'll only have window access to the back. So if someone does get caught up in one of those buildings, it's gonna be tougher, you know, with less access to get through there when you're carrying a ladder to try to get to them and that kind of thing. Those are, you know, Those are things that roll through my head when I look at stuff like this.
But if the condition, for example, if the mechanicals were repaired and you had kind of a relatively clear pathway every other and a gate to the backyard, is that,
Yeah, and that's better.
okay.
Oh, absolutely. It just, also, I think there needs to be, I don't know how you would regulate it, but some way to, keep people from filling that area full of landscaping and other obstructions that, are gonna make it tough, especially at night, when you don't have a lot of light.
So I saw in, I don't recall if it was your recommendation and notes or in the packet, there was a recommendation for sprinklers. And I'm thinking of, while it's not our concern for the financial profitability or things of that nature, I also understand that there are, just think of property and casualty insurance. If houses are closer together, that might cost more. A mitigation on the insurance side or other angles could be the sprinkler, obviously that costs more. Are there other things that, and whether it's legislated or not, are there other things maybe, I just think of Sam loves my stories of living in a zero lot, which is effectively a duplex. There's a different firewall between those because they're adjoining. Are there any things that might mitigate or, again, they're not going to prevent the fire, but I also thought of it as fire going to another dwelling or something of that nature. Is there anything that might?
Sure, fire sprinklers and early warning through a warning system, a fire alarm system with a dialer that, as soon as the system smells smoke, it's dialing and calling the fire department so we can get there before it, moves into something that really causes a problem. Try to get it early in its incipient stage. Those are the big ones.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for the chief or Mr. Perry?
Can I ask you just a question about, I really appreciate the conditions trying to think about the streetscape of the property. And this development, this proposal does include some elevations. And I'm just not sure with the planned development, how much those elevations, they provided a few, they're just examples, right? So to what degree does a plan development that includes elevations, can we then expect the development will look generally like the elevations, or are they just suggestive and the developer's not really held to them at all?
I think if we did not have the conditions, I would be more concerned.
Okay.
Because the conditions talk a lot about the variety of the materials and the
Okay.
variety from one building to another that would be required if you felt that those conditions were helpful. Without those conditions, it's really, they're very suggestive only.
Okay.
The renderings would not be. I think the massing as far as the size and width and the setback as far as the garage setback, those would be mandated.
Okay.
But as far as the geometry of the gables and the types of materials, those things would not, there would be no way to mandate those. I think the conditions have enough variety in them
Okay.
that if you decided that those were important, that would be sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
And there was one thing I did want to add that I neglected to mention. We were talking about spacing between buildings. I do want to stress, even though there is a building code requirement, this is different than previous development. This is 6 feet between houses instead of 10. So that's a noticeable difference. So that's why it's really important to have those mechanicals elsewhere to try to mirror them. I did see John Dethridge's comments about sprinklers. I hadn't thought about fire alarm. We could talk with the developer about potentially looking at those as ways to lower risk, and it may be advantageous to the tenants and the owners as well. We did not add those as conditions, recommended conditions, excuse me. But that would be possible. I don't know what that would do to the development success or possibility overall. But I think it's good to discuss those. The Ohio Building Code does have a firewall requirement. So anytime the distance between the building and the property line is less than 5 feet, there's a fire rating requirement on that wall. That doesn't mean the vinyl siding won't melt, but the wall itself would have a fire rating, which probably means that it would not have a window on the sides. Because anytime you have those perforations, that's more likelihood for fire to spread. So there is a building code requirement that'll have to be met because it's less than 5 feet. If it was the 10 feet between buildings, then that requirement would not be there. So I don't know if that helps give you any background information in addition to the discussion about the sprinklers and the monitored fire alarm. I actually really like the idea of a monitored fire alarm because it's an electronic system that does automatic calling. So if somebody wasn't there and a fire did start, then there would be an automatic call that's out there. So.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
As it relates to the mirrored mechanicals and then the access that would exist, and the chief's concern about whether or not there was landscaping or people stored things there, I think that could be addressed through the HOA.
Great observation, thank you. All right, are
Can
there?
Unless anybody else, I have a little question.
No, go ahead.
The shared driveway apron, I was just taking a look at that, and at one, I'm just trying to understand the logic of it, because it seems to me that like, does it add concrete for value that I've not seen a shared apron like that. There actually are separate driveways, and it doesn't seem like it minimizes the pedestrian conflict because the sidewalks cross effectively the driveway. I guess the shared driveway apron just looks like extra concrete to me, but I guess I've not seen that before.
It's a
so.
wider apron, but it increases, it lessens the number of interruptions of the sidewalk.
Okay.
Because when you share the apron, you have a wider expanse of pedestrian pathway before the next interruption.
Okay.
So that gives the pedestrian a little bit longer to walk before they're having to stop again.
I saw it as 1 at 15 versus 2 at 10, so, you know, even though it individually is larger, I saw it as less total interruption, even space-wise.
I was just looking at the site plans because it seems to me where they cross is actually more the throat of the driveway, and so you've spent more time looking at the math on it. I can see the logic of what you're saying, but it seems to me whether or not they were two separate driveways or shared apron, it wouldn't have that much noticeable difference on the pedestrian experience, and it may add cost in concrete, but again, it's a nitpicky thing. I just hadn't seen that before.
Yeah,
Okay.
and Mr. Bear is here, and I'm sure he
All right.
can
Thank you.
explain the engineering details of that.
Okay.
I do have a question. Condition 3, all light fixtures shall be 3,000 K to match our standards. And if it's our standard, why do we have to have it as a
The
condition?
standard has not been put in the zoning code yet.
Okay,
It's in the standard for the streetlights.
gotcha, okay.
So, yeah.
I was confused by that,
Yeah.
but I just,
That's the warm end of the spectrum, even though it's a lower temperature, if that makes any sense.
yeah, okay, perfect. Any other questions for the chief or Mr. Perry? All right. Mr. Bear.
Good evening, Oxford Planning Commission. My name is John Baer with Baer Becker, 110 South College Avenue. I was a part of the process with the design of the most recent South Farm that came through. And going and resubmitting this again, I recollected that the original pond for South Farm, the first go-around, my grandfather did the drainage calculations, which I re-recollected resubmitting again because the pond's still there, right? So we're familiar with the project. Here on behalf of the applicant, JA Development, and Joe Christo is here with me as well if you have any detailed questions on the home products proposed and those kinds of things. So I don't have a very detailed presentation. Sam covered it pretty thoroughly, and it was here very recently for a concept plan. So I'm just going to touch on the most recent proposal, talk about the new proposal, some of the differences, and what has changed since the concept plan that was here before you just a few months ago. So as Sam said, the prior development that was approved a few years ago consisted of the same 25 lots. Previously, it had an alley planned. It's shown on the bottom of your screen here, which is the west side, Hoover Drive down the middle. So the homes had some accessing from the front onto Hoover Drive and some accessing the rear to that private alley. At the north end of the development, there was a proposed water quality basin. The prior HOA had planned exterior maintenance for the home, so previously it was planned toward, again, the HOA would do snow removal and landscaping and those sorts of things. That's not currently in the HOA plans for this, but just a difference since the last proposal. And the open space primarily is left along the outside perimeters, both abutting the South Farm section that's existing and future sections to the west. Here's a look then at the plan that was submitted. Again, it's gone through a lot of iterations, both working with Sam and Zach, and then also through the concept plan review that came before the commission. A few of the items that came back from the commission and have been discussion items, again, here tonight was, how do we reduce the predominant garage frontage when looking down the street? How do we improve the view of the front yards? Again, very similar, but looking down the street, the view of those front yard areas. And then also having a variety of units with the development, making sure it's not the same product over and over again. I think we've accomplished those. I'll touch on some of the details and then, again, are here for questions that you have. Again, the same 25 units that were previously proposed, so same density. Removal of that alley along the western side, so only public streets are now proposed. Hoover Drive, which runs north and south, a small extension of Roberts Drive, and then that Booth Road extension at the south end of the site. So the road width widening, again, the back of curb to back of curb width as proposed is 28 feet. It matches, again, the South Forest Edge subdivision that was recently approved. It also matches the street widths that are pretty common throughout unincorporated areas of Butler County. The Butler County Engineers Office has standard details for a similar residential street that's their typical is 28 back-to-back. They do have some that are narrower, but the most common subdivision would have a 28-foot back-to-back. Let's see, similarly to the prior one, the same water quality basin at the north end of the site. And then I've just highlighted those open space areas in green. They're proposed as open space lots that'll be owned and managed by the HOA, but they'll be covered by a conservation easement. We worked with staff on the prior project for this site on the conservation easement language. Basically grants the HOA the right to go in and do necessary maintenance, remove invasive plants, those kinds of things, but it protects the mature vegetation with the language of the easement. So that's where that is represented. And when we come through for the final plat process, the fine details of that will be included there. So as Sam alluded to, there's basically a total of 3 waivers that are requested as part of this, which is a slight reduction from the 5 formal waivers that were requested from the prior iteration. So the 3 waivers being lot coverage, the front setback, and then the number of entrances to the subdivision. So typically 2 would be required. Only 1 is available from Roberts Drive, but the Booth Road extension provides that future second entrance when that road extends. The front setback, so R1B would typically require a 30-foot front setback. We're asking for a reduction to 20. As you'll see on my next slides, the building elevations have those garages set back further, so your driveway length will be slightly longer than that 20 feet, 23, 25-foot kind of range by the time you have the front of the house and then that garage set back further. Just gives a little extra space for a vehicle sitting in that driveway behind the sidewalk. And then lastly, lot coverage. So because of the smaller lots that are proposed, the ask is for a max lot coverage of 65%. I just ran some very crude math here, but if the subdivision were to be developed as the standard R1B, there would be no open space requirement. So the lots would encompass all of the property that you see here, the open space and that. So if we took the maximum 40% lot coverage on that whole area, you could have about 96,000 square feet of impervious surface. But if this 65 is met for just the lot areas, you're at about 70,000 square feet. So although on a per lot basis, it's a higher percentage, the total permissible impervious surface would be less as opposed to a straight zoned subdivision kind of design. So here's just a quick look at, again, the same building information that Sam shared. Again, showing that garage kind of setback to help with that variety of a view down the street. Is that something we should be aware of?
That
Well, the
tornado
fire chief
warning
is
or
right
what?
there.
I know,
so
I guess I should be
if
asking
he's
him.
not moving, I'm not moving.
Good enough.
Amber alert.
Okay, Amber Alert.
Still
okay.
important.
Yeah, it's emergency.
Okay.
Again, shows that single garage door that's being proposed to try to reduce that front facade, to have a less percentage of garage door. The building code question that was coming up earlier about the fire separation. So I'm not an architect. If Scott was still here, I would probably try to twist his arm into answering this question. But the Ohio Building Code does have requirements for that reduced setback. The home building team is aware of those requirements and are fully on board with meeting those design requirements, but I can't provide any further details as to the inner workings of those material requirements and that kind of stuff at this stage. Similarly, here's the two-story elevation, same single garage with that garage set back a little bit from the front facade there.
It is a tornado warning.
Really?
It is, yeah.
My do not disturb did not disturb.
Yeah, no, the National Weather Service doesn't seem to have.
Do you have your location set to the Bahamas again? Best presentation ever.
Well,
I know. I like the,
There's-
Just
there's-
making sure we're not in peril.
I mean, there is a warning area just kind of west of us in Franklin County, but
What should we do, Mr. Deatherage?
Looking at what I see here, looks fine to me. I don't hear any storm sirens.
Okay.
All right, well.
let's keep going
we
until
will-
it comes. 'cause
We
it may
will
come in 5
deputize
minutes.
the chief to be our emergency,
Management official.
management official, so Mr. Bear can
that
finish.
sounds great. I'll listen to the chief.
Just keep your eyes and ears peeled.
Perfect.
Um,
So let's see here, a couple items that were discussed previously here when Sam was giving his presentation. So the side yard areas being kept clear, it sounds like that's something that Joe and his team would be happy to work with the legal department on the HOA requirements. No issue there. Happy to provide that easier access to the fire department. The apron, so it doesn't necessarily reduce the crossing width that you have. You still have a driveway width at each garage or each house. It just, again, lumps them together. Same thing that is occurring with the Oats Trail, just reducing the number of conflict points.
Okay.
So yeah, we're gonna get, getting to a driveway, and if you're, an adult is walking, maybe you don't notice it as much, but I have a 15-month-old that I have to hold her hand and lean like this, and when you have less driveways to cross, right, all right, let's work one driveway at a time kind of thing. So it, from a pedestrian standpoint, makes a better experience.
Okay.
And again, makes a bigger front yard feel instead of having those divided into smaller segments, is the hope at least. So hopefully I've addressed those items. And then on the conditions, so Sam went through them all. I just want to touch on two that the applicant is in agreement with all, with the exception of requesting two modifications, first to number 1 and second to number 5. So number 1 pertains to the one-car garage requirement, which currently reads, any home constructed within the subdivision shall have at most a one-car sized garage. No home shall have a two-car garage or greater. Again, the intent of that is you're staying in front of the house, reducing the garage area on the front facade, right? So the change would be, and I've got cross out in red and then my new verbiage in blue here, would be to instead write that garages would have a one-car width maximum. So you could have a two-car tandem, meaning you could pull one car in and one car behind it in the garage, so your width opening is the same. Someone standing on the sidewalk still sees one garage, but provides the opportunity for someone to have a two-car garage if they wanted to. So then it reads, no home shall have a garage width of 2 cars or greater. So you couldn't have a 3-car garage there or a 2-car, only stacked away from the street. And then Sam has a copy of my presentation, but this is just a fully modified condition for the record that it's, if it were to be modified that way, that reads through. And then going back, so number 5 pertains to the funding of the trail. And I won't read the whole thing, but the second sentence is what I would like to key in on. So if construction of Oates Phase 5 does not occur prior to this 5-year deadline, the developer shall be given the opportunity to A, complete the trail at their expense, B, contribute funding for its construction, or C, the city can use the financial securities in place to fund the path, meaning the bonds that go with the construction could be used. So the modification request would be to add, you have A, B, and C. The request would be to add option D, just to say the path could be funded in an alternate manner that is both acceptable to the developer and the service department. So this condition came about when the staff report came out. We didn't have a good opportunity to work with staff, given the holiday week and everything else, to talk through this, but would just give an opportunity to allow one other option that's, could be discussed, and the service department would have to agree to it first, so we're not trying to skirt around the system that way, but just to allow another method to possibly fund this if we could work together. Obviously, the developer is very on board with having the trail come through, the same thing that Owl's Landing is having now, that it's a big benefit to have the property on that. Just want to give a little bit of flexibility down the road. So those are the 2 asks. And again, this is just showing a fully modified condition number 5, if that were to be accepted as a revised condition. And I believe that's everything that I have in my notes, unless there's any other questions that I can answer, anything I missed from the discussions.
I have a question, but I know that Dr. Perthrich is probably going to ask it, but Ms. Webster never gets to go first, so I'm going to call on her.
Yes, so I may have missed it in the presentation, but can you speak to the approximate square footage of the units that you will be building?
Yep, so currently planned between 1,100 square feet and 1,800 square feet, which is on the order of, according to the county auditor's website, is on the order of the South Farm Section 1 homes that are existing on Morgan Circle.
Okay, great. And the other thing, and, you know, maybe this is a problem on my part, but when you say water quality basin, is this basically like just, what is the purpose of the water quality basin?
Yeah, let me flip back to the, actually, let me see if I can find a better aerial here in my spare slides.
I mean, I know where it is, but is it like to catch runoff, or is it for something else?
So the entire area drains into that existing pond that was originally designed as a flood control pond. It was designed, I believe, in the early 2000s or late 90s. And at the time, the regulations required flood control to limit the amount of water that was running off downstream.
Sure.
Since that time, the regulations through the Ohio EPA have been adapted to have a quality requirement where it needs to be filtered in some fashion. The existing pond doesn't provide that level of treatment as it sits today, so this would be a treatment device as a basin first. So stormwater would enter into that basin, and during larger rain events, perhaps like this evening, it would fill up and slowly let that water out over 48 hours or so through small filter type outlet to meet that quality treatment requirement.
So it is basically a flood control mechanism with filters.
With
Is
a
that
Brita.
correct?
And it's not so much geared toward the large, like flood rain events. It's more so the more common shorter rain events. In order to have
Yeah, okay.
the
I understand what you're saying.
Yep,
That's
a
fine, thank you.
treatment filter. Yep.
Dr. Perthrich?
No questions for me?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask the question I was going to ask. Okay.
Not yet?
I just want to hear what you thought. That's fast.
I want to know the condition 5 that you asked for modification. What potential future other sources of funding are you thinking?
So I am just in charge of designing the subdivision and presenting it,
Nicely played.
and maybe waiting for a tornado to cut off my presentation. But other than that, if I could answer that question, I would be making the big bucks, right?
I think it just keeps it open.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking of like grant funding or something like that, but that's about all I can think of.
Right, that, yeah,
Okay,
it could be that,
okay.
yeah, right. Just to not limit it to say, well, we have a public grant to pay for this and the state would pay for it, but the conditions don't allow us to do that, so,
Okay.
yeah.
I know this is question time for you, but I have a sneaking suspicion that we'll end up with a round robin. Mr. Perry, would that be acceptable to the city, the condition 5 edition? Would the tandem garage be acceptable? And the reason I ask, I have no problem with the concept, I just don't know zoning wise if it's,
Those are both fine.
okay. Mr. Bracken?
Well, also for one, I mean, I think we talked about this previously, maybe several times by now, but is it purely an aesthetic and resource use issue to have one garage? I don't mind it, but it always feels weird to me because it's so aesthetic that we're just saying, you should build the houses that look exactly like this, as opposed to, I don't know, meaningful infrastructural and zoning-based decisions, yeah. Like, it's this nature of planned unit developments, but does anybody else understand what I'm saying? I think it's very weird that we're regulating garage size and the particular look of houses.
Well, I think we can talk, I mean, we can debate it. I mean,
Yeah.
I think the streetscape is aesthetic and functional
Yeah.
simultaneously, and I think that it's about,
So Mr. Barrett can run and check his text to make sure he's getting the same tornado warning. Are there any other questions from Mr. Bear or
I got nothing,
Mr.
my
Christo?
Android must not care about me.
I know, right? We're Android, we're not safe. All right,
I think we're safe.
all right.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on this matter? And we're batting 0 for 4. Well, 0 for 3. The chief was already up here.
so you want a
All
motion
right.
to close public hearing on PC 2024, was it 06 and 07?
06 and 07, yes.
Okay.
All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
So moved?
Mr. Bracken with the second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? All right, we are in board time. So,
Can I just answer Jason's point? Just-
Absolutely.
And it's about that for planners, how buildings relate to the street is in part aesthetic, but it's also really functional, you know, in terms of, and this is why, for example, in new traditional development, having a front porch engage the street is a lot different than having a garage engage the street. And it's just about the sociability in the neighborhood, the proportionality. I think that, you know, the garage facing thing is, it's planners joke about, they call them snout houses. They say they failed the trick or treat test where you can't find the front door because the entranceway is basically a garage. So it's about, it's partly aesthetic, but it's also about a traditional style of architecture and how it relates to the street with all the social benefits related to that, which I think are, you know, I mean, again, this was, we'll have to look back at our comprehensive plan, but, you know, this was a traditional urban development. So it aligns with what the comprehensive plan says is our vision for new development as opposed to more suburban auto-oriented development. And then just to build on that, it's also just the amount of frontage. It's like, is the front yard facing terminating the street, or is the driveway apron? You know, and those things at an individual level may not seem like much, but if you multiply them over 25 houses, it really alters the character of the neighborhood. So that, I think, is why why we cared about it, why staff talked about that. So.
Well, I think ultimately the developer, it was a result, what the condition that you see is a result of our collaboration with the developer.
Yeah.
So whether you leave it in or take it out may be not as important now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but-
Yeah, that was just me commenting on the whole situation.
Well, and I also see it as, I see them as part and parcel. If we're gonna allow closer buildings, we also have to work with the functionality of, and I was trying to pull up a address so Sam could pull it up, but where we used to live, exactly to Dr. Prithridge's point is, I can't tell you how many front-loaded double-car garage, 20-some foot wide concrete driveways. That's what people saw, and if you were trying to go visit somebody, you didn't know where the heck to walk in the house. So if we're gonna have them closer and, have some of these things, I think it's very warranted. I mean, I'm indifferent on the one-car garage, but I greatly appreciate the clever and ingenuity of the tandems. I think that's a brilliant solution. I think it's just a great way to find that middle ground. So, I mean, I agree and understand with what you're saying, but when you start to allow things to be closer and, you know, we're trying to have functionality, sometimes what might seem aesthetic is actually, to me, it's more functional.
There are still trick-or-treaters circling around houses. Not
I know, right?
One neighborhood that you might be familiar with is Kelly Drive.
Yeah.
You know, they're smaller, they're duplexes, but they are similar in size and scale to what we have presented tonight. Also one-car garages, but separated. So that might give you a little bit of a comparison, you know, to drive down and take a look at. There, in that case, they're very, the garage is very forward. You know, it's the first thing you see. So I think here, the developer is trying to create a more human scale, human presence front yard, and they're willing to do that. So
I have a question, and maybe I should have asked the chief or Mr. Bear, but I'll let you, you know, yield your time if needed. With, I think the tandem garage might solve the problem, but I'm just thinking a two-car family, one-car garage. You have the garage and you have the stacking room. Do you foresee any problems with more street parking, more per capita parking because of the designs we're talking about?
Yes.
So having a narrower street may be problematic to the chief, so.
But I think 28 is still wide enough for two 10-foot travel lanes and on-street parking on one side.
Well, that's being debated currently.
Okay.
And so we did have a condition in here that talked about regulation of on-street parking.
Yeah.
But we got a late comment about that from staff, and we wanted to have an opportunity to talk with the developer, city manager, police, without legislating it
Yeah.
in the condition.
But it's wide enough to provide that functionality.
Well,
Right, 28 feet
He's
is.
saying it's debatable.
It's being
Well,
debated right now.
we have very conservatively wide travel lanes in the city of Oxford that are exceptionally wide by most city standards.
My
The
street
Ashton
is
ma-
not exorbitantly wide.
Yeah, absolutely, not twice as wide as it, yeah, I mean, by the ASHTO standards, I mean, for this kind of street, a 10-foot travel lane is within the range of what a standard engineered street could be. It's just not Oxford's habitual standard, right?
The reason it could be concerning here is because, different than South Forest Edge, which had quarter-acre and half-acre lots with two-car garages, plenty of off-street storage of vehicles.
Yeah.
This one does not.
Yeah.
And so, with a 28-foot wide street where you have a large lot, large garage, large driveway, whether you have on-street parking or not is not as important because
Yeah.
there's not as much demand,
Yeah.
to Mr. Watt's point. But here we have a situation where there'll be higher demand because there's less off-street storage.
And my only concern, and again, I don't think anyone would be malicious in this, but if the city manager and city staff say, okay, hey, we'll permit X, and then, you know, the chief and other people, there's a situation, a scenario, you know, we can't help humans who park where they're not supposed to and other things. Again, I'm sure most people would realize the cost benefit of, okay, they're trying to keep us safe, but, you know, as a homeowner, if I just think of, and not to pick on the bike lanes, but if I was on Spring Street and I bought a house thinking, wow, you can park in front of the house and now there's no parking and it's a bike lane, you know, I don't have an answer either way, but I want to think about that, especially because there is no, just park here. So, that's my only concern, but again, that's under the purview of the city manager, and I think city staff and the manager and the chief are quite aware and capable, but I just wanted to ask that question. Any other? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
can I just say, I would hope that had the proposal been for two-car with garages, that wouldn't shut down housing development options going forward, that's all.
He wants a 1.5-car garage. Just kidding. All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns, observations, epiphanies, tornado warnings?
Well, I would summarize that I love this proposed development. I think it hits on so many of the things we've been trying to do. And I'm hoping the fact that the developer and staff have met in the middle means that it meets our goals and the developer thinks in theory this should be a go. I personally think that something of this style, if the developer can afford to build it, would really, I think there's a market for this kind of stuff. And yeah, and I think that, you know, garage is square footage, and I think these houses could hypothetically be more affordable to people. They get more functional square footage. And so I love this. I think it is a really nice compromise for us. I think the idea, when I think about the driveways, it's not so much that they're shared, but they're paired, you know, so it does leave an expanse of lawn between houses. So I really appreciate that the conditions seem to hit on everything, and I believe there's no reason to believe that the street wouldn't be wide enough to have enough parking on one side to provide the spillover parking, to calm the street, to provide the fire and EMS access. So I'm excited about this and hoping it gets approved and built.
So whomever would like to make a motion one way or the other, if you're so inclined to include Mr. Bear's updates that Mr. Perry said he was amicable to in, at minimum, spirit.
And staff has access to the text of what we're, because,
Okay.
yeah, they were well thought out.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that, I mean, I know we all saw it, I just wanted to make sure staff was in agreement with the verbiage.
Yes.
Okay, so that would be, based on what I'm hearing, if there was a motion to approve, it would be with the adaptation of Mr. Bear's proposed and Mr. Perry's accepted number 1 and 5.
Can I make that motion?
What
after
do you say?
what you just said?
And I'll second that, yeah.
Yes. I tried to tee you up for that one, and I'm trying to find the standards, but nonetheless. So I have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? Mr. Perry, please call the roll.
Mr. Prithridge,
Yes?
Ms. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Ms. Rosenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Watt.
Yes. All right, that is passed. Thank you very much. All right, and for the good of the order and those who missed the beginning, we get to go back to old business, so I will entertain a motion to take PC 2024-03. Yeah, yeah.
I just need
And this will happen after a 5-minute recess. It is 8:45, so we'll reconvene at 8:50.
Oh, okay.
It's the two
We're just taking
sprites.
So Sam, will our,
I haven't opened the second one.
All right, Mr. Dana.
Do you remember I used to do an auto potty break for Steve? He's like, oh, when you get to my age, you can't quite make it as a book.
will the fact that our comprehensive plan has the street widths in there help at all?
Why is another one?
Do you have it set to your old house?
Yeah, I was wondering if it was.
Because you used to live west of town.
My husband
North.
says everything's going west.
That is so weird.
Still not raining.
It's literally touching on the state line, like
Yeah.
College Corner, Indiana's probably in it, but.
You know, we gotta love it. The minute I heard that, the first person I looked at was John. I was like, if he's not moving, I don't care.
Yeah, there's a cell.
denied.
I'm just gonna turn it off.
I bet you it's hitting your
Yeah,
dad's.
in this area until 9:15. Take shelter now, but there's nothing,
And not on the net, yeah.
yeah.
It was nice to let them all go.
But if you click the notice, it takes you to a page that says that the storm that was in the area has moved, and this will expire. Well, then why is it?
Yeah, mine shows though there's something like blasting right through Liberty right now. So, yeah, so I mean if you, there we go.
Okay.
Oh, that was you.
Yeah, during the recess. Yeah. Okay,
Normally you would
to
go
the
to a
basement we
basement.
go.
Yeah, I've always wanted to see the basement.
Or at least away from the windows.
Do whatever you all are doing. Follow.
Which is funny, because isn't it, if there's like a warning anywhere in Butler County?
Oh, you know
all
what?
Butler County?
What's up?
There's one in Trenton that looks like.
Okay, Glenn, come on down.
There's a big red, see that thing in Trenton? Yeah. That's probably why it's going off.
I think it's like, it's gotta be a warning radar.
technically, we're gonna come back.
Oh, that's right, we did a 5-minute recess.
Yeah, we did a recess.
Man, that took me a while.
All right. And for the record, we are coming back from recess at 8:52. For posterity, there was a tornado siren, so hence the missing commission. But we will now go to old business, PC 2024-03, zoning text amendment to require primary residence for transient guest lodging. Mr. Perry is the applicant. This was tabled at the May meeting, so first and foremost, I will entertain a motion to take it off the table.
I guess, does staff have a recommendation on, I mean, I'm happy to take it off the table and to talk about it. We still are under a moratorium. And so whether does staff have a feeling of whether they want to hear it, take it off the table?
Technically, yeah, we should, yeah, to take it off, we would have to have a motion to untable it to discuss.
Okay. So I just didn't know what tabling, so we can discuss it, not take it off the table. I can make a motion in a second, then we could discuss it and then vote to not take it off the table. What's the best?
It's on the table now, and in order to discuss, you need to remove it from the table.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just didn't know whether to discuss whether to remove it to the table. But I'll make a
I'm
motion
not
that
sure,
we remove it
yeah, I'm
from the
not sure if an
table.
untable,
ready.
yeah, I was gonna say, I'm
Okay.
not sure if a
Yeah.
table untable motion is really,
Okay.
like, kind of motion to adjourn is not discuss it.
Yeah, I don't know how that, so I'll.
All right,
move that
so-
we take PC 2024-03 off of the table.
All right, I have a motion to take it off the table. Anyone want to put a number 2 on that?
Second.
We'll give Ms. Webster the win on that one. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Perfect. I'll also entertain a motion to adjourn to public hearing.
I move we adjourn to public hearing on
Sec-
PC 2024-03.
And a second from the vice chair. He's in the spirit of making sure we have.
No, it's right. He's right.
Ordinance ordained, but Mr. Perry, you get to talk again.
All right. So this has been several months in the making. There was a tabling due to our research not being completed, and now we have the research completed, and so we have an agenda, and so happy to get this back in front of you again. There's been a moratorium since March on new short-term rentals in response to council suggestion for taking a look at potentially revising the code to prevent what has been called standalone short-term rentals, or the conversion of them. And so we did some research. We first drafted a code amendment that we thought would be something in response to what a majority of council was interested in. But we felt like it really needed some data to go with that, to support that. So city council authorized the purchase of some data that we did not previously have access to. The company is called AirDNA. They actually obtain records from Airbnb and VRBO, which are the two biggest brokerages that broker short-term rental, or transient guest lodging is the term that we have in our Oxford zoning code. And we looked at that data. We also had our existing tracking system that council authorized a few years ago called GovOS, short-term rental solutions, and that is the system that property owners are required by local ordinance to create a lodging tax remittal account in order to remit the lodging tax that is associated with, specific to short-term rentals. There are other lodging tax remittals that are being done from the hotels, and they're using their own just direct submittal based on the percentage of sales and lodging. The short-term rental has its own system, and that's our GovOS system. And so we looked at those and compared those to the AirDNA data and came up with some statistics, which I have in the report here. And I wanted to kind of go through this before we talked about the actual text amendment that we had previously drafted. What we found was 69 active short-term rentals within the Oxford city limits. So active is defined as renting within the past 12 months. 35 of those have known physical locations. So we were able to look at the advertisements and try to compare them to existing records that we have, photographs of property, maps. We couldn't identify several of those because the advertisements don't have pictures of the outside of the house or whatever the condition may be. But we did come up with 35. Many of those were already in our existing tracking system, but many of the ones that are not, we don't know where they are. 27 of the 69 that are active are compliant. We call them registered, but that means two things. They've got a rental permit or rental license, which means they've applied for that rental license just like they would for any rental property, and it's been inspected and approved. And they also have submitted their lodging tax remittal account, and it's been approved as well. So they have to have two things to be legally registered with the city of Oxford. So now I want to look at the number of days per year. And I think if you go back a few years, those of you that were involved or maybe interested at the time, the threshold that was used to determine just how significant it is in the city was the number of days per year. So 19 of those 69 active in the past 12 months are rented for 30 days or less per year. So you might say that's not very active, or it's kind of a side income. 16 of the 69 are rented between 31 and 90 days, so more active. Possibly standalone, not a primary residence, possibly just a very active side income for a primary residence. 34 of the 69 are rented over 90 days per year. You could definitely say that that's a business. That was the threshold that was determined back in 2020 when Oxford amended the code to require licensing and permitting and had zoning regulations. And of the 34 that are rented over 90 days per year, 20 are outside what we call the mile square, and 4 we don't know where they are. And the reason that's important is because the text amendment that we drafted was looking at the zoning districts of R1A, R1B, and R2A. And actually, let me verify that. And R3 as well, which are all districts outside of the mile square, which is the area bounded by Locust, Chestnut, Sycamore, and Patterson. However, there are some areas outside the mile square that have the MS district. But we use that term just to kind of give a general explanation to folks that are interested in, does this affect me as a property owner? Or if you're someone who is not an owner of rental property, how would this change the housing supply? Because I think that's one of the questions and comments that's been asked by members of City Council. We also looked at transactions and property values to determine if there's a correlation between that cost or that purchase amount for a home, if it's possibly going to be converted to a standalone short-term rental or it's being purchased as an investment. And I think that was a concern of some members of council is, are we losing housing stock while we're also trying to add housing stock for the purpose of increasing it in the community? Is it leaving just as fast as we're trying to add it, or even faster? And so we were not able to get too much correlation between the purchases and the conversion. However, I will say that Dr. Prithridge sent an email today about a property on Ridge Avenue, which is one that we had had a lot of communication about directly before the moratorium went into place. And I printed that out and put it in front of you, and I'm sure he can talk more about that. This particular property, because of the fact that it had not been licensed or registered, the owner just so happened to be inquiring about that before the moratorium went into effect. They did obtain a rental license before the moratorium went into effect, which actually would have allowed them to continue the use. And so our text amendment, which I'll talk about in a moment, which would require a primary residence documentation for any of the properties in those 4 zoning districts. So that would help to retain, the idea is that it would help to retain that housing stock. So in that particular situation, the property happened to be up for sale during the moratorium, even though the owner did obtain a rental license and inspection and was in compliance. From what my assessment is, that they actually was trying to accomplish the city's goal by realizing that they had made this conversion and were not in compliance, and they actually, as far as I know, the property is not being used that way. And according to Dr. Prithwich's research, they actually even lowered the price in order to, because of the moratorium, which I found very interesting as well. So I'm not sure that they had to, I think they would have been able legally to sell it as an investment property because they did have the rental license, but it appears that they chose not to do that. So I wanted to print that email out and have it for you as in the record since it came out before the meeting, and I wanted to have it publicly available if anybody wanted to look at it. And that, I think, inspired some discussions several months ago, that particular property. There have been a couple other properties that we're aware of that we know were converted for the very purpose of standalone. But I think another potential effect of this this text amendment would be that folks that are considering doing that would have a chilling effect on that. They would not be able to legally get a rental license in those zoning districts if it's not their primary residence for a short-term rental. They could rent the property, but not for short-term usage. So the text amendment, getting to that, let me switch over to the screen. And this would be an amendment to our existing transient guest lodging section. And the main focus that we have there is that it would require primary residence. And we looked at City of Louisville for this language. They had gone through a very similar process several years ago. We didn't find anything else that we found comparable or that would work for us other than what the City of Louisville had. And so we essentially mirrored the language very similar and adapted it to fit our own. There have been questions about, well, what if the person has more than one house? And so rather than legislating the exact details of what would be required, we like the phrase that Louisville had, which is facts and circumstances, and that allows us to ask for information if needed. We did get a couple comments by email from folks that are existing short-term rental property owners asking, how does this affect me? Our answer is if you're already licensed and you're already doing this, it does not affect you. But if you're looking to buy an additional property, that would be where the prohibition would be if this went into effect. One property owner asked about how would this be enforced? And so answer is it's a work in progress. We have been pretty pleased with the realtors in town who have proactively reached out when they've got a client interested in the property. Is this use allowed for this property? The local realtors are aware of the local short-term rental regulations and have not been afraid to ask, as far as I know. And in this case, the realtor for the one on Ridge Avenue was not aware, and so we reached out to them to talk to them and let them know about regulations, which may have resulted in the changes to the listing. that was described in front of you on the email. So as far as enforcement, we don't think it will be perfect, but we think with the right amount of education and realtors asking if there's a potential transaction, that will be helpful. We've got, like I said, several of the ones that are actively being used are already registered. We've got staff working to try to identify the locations of the ones that we don't know so that we can reach out to them specifically. Because if we don't have an address or any kind of a contact, it's pretty difficult to do that. But some of them are being utilized pretty heavily, and so in order to be consistent, it would be our best effort to try to get everyone in compliance if at all possible. But again, the R1A, R1B, R2A, and R3 districts, which I have a map here. So the outlying districts to the west, so these, you have to help me out with the colors, but kind of the lighter tan and yellow on the western side of town and a little bit to the north. But the mile square area, as I said, all of that has the MS district that's labeled after it. Let me zoom in a little bit more there. And I think the concept that Mr. Moore and I came up with is that the areas in those MS districts, or the ones that are inside the mile square, those are probably already pretty heavily percentage-wise rental properties. And so the likelihood of those being at an affordable cost for a first-time home buyer or someone moving even within town, it's probably more likely that they would be looking elsewhere outside the mile square for a starter home or something of that nature. And so trying to retain the existing housing stock in those neighborhoods that are outside the mile square, I think, is the goal of at least some members of council. So it's not perfect research, but it gives you some window into the market. And, we have got a couple stories there we can tell as well. But I think this is the simplest approach that we could make if you wanted to make a recommendation to council at some point. We've gotten a couple comments from property owners, a few questions. But all in all, we haven't really heard a lot of feedback at this point. But I can answer any questions you might have if I've cleared anything up.
I do have a question. Actually, I need the map back up there.
Okay.
The overlay zones.
Uh-huh.
So I was trying to reread through this. Transient guest lodging, so like I live in an overlay. Does that have any impact? Because the overlay, as I remember it being passed, at least for where I live, was that no more than 4 unrelated people can be rented to or housed there. I don't remember if it specified a duration for transient, short-term, long-term.
It does.
Okay.
So those are no more than 2 unrelated in those overlay areas under the current zoning rules. 4 would be for where there's not an overlay. But there is a threshold. You cannot essentially have what we call a conditional use for a bed and breakfast, which would be essentially a business in those overlay areas as well. So that would be outright prohibited. You couldn't apply for a conditional use to do that. In an area that does not have the overlay, you could apply for a business, but it would go through the conditional use process.
So how does transient guest lodging impact, or is it impacted by, so I'm just thinking, my house, I would imagine fire code, you could rent to 12 people. Like, does that violate our overlay?
Yes, it would.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Because it's no more than 2.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. All right, any other questions for Mr. Perry? Or any questions? I guess I asked one.
Just, I know this is probably not the focus of this conversation, but who within the city government will be managing this process of compliance? For, you know, that these people are not renting for more than 90 days? Who, like?
Right now, there are 3 departments that are involved in that. There's not a single person that manages it because it involves finance, nuisance, and zoning.
So just play out a scenario. So somebody is suspected of violating the 90-day rule. What, maybe it's gossip or something. What are the steps that would be taken to, enforce the law or the resolution?
So that particular law is zoning related.
Okay.
So that could come directly to the Community Development Department. And we've got a couple different methods on our website. One is called Report a Concern, which you can submit. It's essentially a ticket.
Okay.
That's tracked through our website. Or somebody could drop off a letter, anonymous letter. So it's email, phone call, a physical drop off of a letter, and then the city will follow up on the concern. If they provide contact information, that's helpful because then we can try to address the concern.
Where I'm going with this is, it's an administrative function that I don't think we've had previously, exactly. So I just wanted to underline that it's important that the city of Oxford has boots on the ground or administrative people who will be, responsible for dealing with this. Because it's not going to be easy, right?
There hasn't been a staff person identified for this. This is very time consuming. So I can't say with 100%
No, I'm
that
just
there are
saying.
people that are dedicated for this, but there are people that do follow up as time allows.
And I'm saying this in support of the effort. I'm not trying to be difficult. I just think it's really important that if we move in this direction, that we have the resources to administrate it. That's
Oh,
my
I
whole
understand.
point. Yeah.
Yep.
Any other questions for Mr. Perry? All right, seeing no questions for Mr. Perry, and he is the applicant, the city, and all sorts of everything all in one. I guess we will entertain any any comments from the public related to this. And just a reminder, please come to the microphone. We would appreciate if you would state your name, your address, and I will get my stopwatch going for 3 minutes. So if you go ahead and introduce yourself, I would greatly appreciate it.
I'm Pete McCarthy. I live at 6073 Contreras Road here in Oxford. And what else did you need? That covered it?
Nope,
Good.
your 3 minutes is a go.
Actually, Sam covered an awful lot of the topics that I was concerned about, but I want to go back to thinking about them because, as an example, the house next door to me is a standalone Airbnb. So when that person's children graduate from college and they decide to move out of town, are they going to be able to retain that business aspect? So I'm wondering if that's a possibility or if that's going to be considered a non-conforming use and then it falls off at the change. I just want to bring that type of topic up. And then I agree with what you're saying about supervision of this, because as it is, we cannot identify all these houses. So if we can't identify all these houses, how are we possibly going to monitor it? And who's going to be enforcing it? If it's not a police action, it's a zoning action or a nuisance or whatever. How are we going to do this? And is the city willing to get an additional person for whatever that is? And I'm not sure we can all afford that. It seems like we're trying to accomplish affordable housing and trying to go for the low-hanging fruit. But I'm not 100% sure this is the way to go about doing it. Because once you're giving somebody a rental permit, they ought to be able to have full usage of that rental permit. And that gets into a sticky issue too. And then example. As a realtor, I do have parents that come and ask me, I have a neighbor who's, one of the parents has family that's local, so they can stay in town, no problem, see their grandkids. Well, the other grandparent would love to come to town and have a place so that they could stay a lot of the year and visit the grandkids. But this is sort of restricts it, because the house either sits empty, so he can see the grandkids, or he can use it. And again, it keeps going back into the same types of questions. I understand the need for affordable housing, but I think the best way to cure that is the previous discussion. We need to build more. We have a supply and demand issue. We need supply of housing, which is going to drive the cost down so that we can eventually have affordable housing. I'm not sure that even if all 100 houses in the Airbnb situation fell off the map, it would make a hill of beans of difference. And I have a legitimate permit. And the reason I need it is I'm out of the town for quite a bit of the year while I'm traveling. And sure, then we use it. But, and when we talk about days, we don't talk about days, we talk about stays. So is that, if I have a guest come, whether he stays for 2 days, 3 days, or 4 days, it's considered one stay, and that's how Airbnb considers it too. So, I don't know, you're telling me I'm running out of time? Okay.
All right, thank you, sir. All
So
right.
I move approval, move to close public hearing on PC 2024-03.
All right, I have a motion to close public hearing.
Second.
Vice Chair Rosenberg with the second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Seeing none, we are adjourned from public hearing.
So I move approval of PC 2024-03. It's
I wish-
9:21, I'm not messing around.
You know what? You know what? I wish we could add the mile square to it.
Well, we can,
But anyway,
well, first we need the second and then we can talk about it, right?
second.
All right, we have a vice chair who just seconded that. So, any discussion on this?
Well, I just first want to say thank you because I've been a primary impetus for this. I know that staff has had concerns about this, but I think that the language that they crafted meets the concerns as shared by the House. You can talk more, Mix Rosenberg, about the Housing Commission. I mean, I think we've had conversations as a planning commission, had conversations on council, and the affordability issues that surround this. When we went into the regulating Airbnbs, and this is for your information, we already have this code about the 90 days that we've had a number of years, and that stuff addressed kind of the quality of life issues. But it dawned on us, someone into the process, that it was really an affordability issue related to the displacement of the primary use. I think this clarifies what I believe was the intent of the code that we adopted in 2019, which I think helps justify it. We can go through the decision standards. But I think this is really key. This is what other cities have done. And I shared this anecdote. It's just one anecdote. But, when you see realtors dropping the price of a house by $140,000 because it can't be used as an investment property as they envisioned it, wow, talk about an impactful use of regulations to help with your housing affordability situation. Who knows whether they could have gotten 410, that was crazy. But the idea that the mere moratorium shaved $140,000 off the price of a house tells me doing this it's not going to help with the baseline. Our housing is expensive in Oxford. But if it can be expensive for the owner occupancy, we can deal with that without having that crazy gentrification of the investment property on top of it. So I think this is super in line with our goals, and given how slow our development of affordable housing has been, in which we still yet have break ground on a single one of the ones we've been talking about, every single house that we can keep in owner occupancy is a huge win for us. So thank you, Sam. I know that you wanted to think it through and you were a skeptic, but I think the code that you crafted meets the goals. I mean, I think we could talk about why we throw the mile square to the different, but I'll stop with that. I'm just in support of this code.
All right. Any other comments?
Yeah, I just want to say that I feel that it's the principle I get, and I'm all for it, I'm just a little concerned about how it's going to be put into effect. That's all. That was.
And if I could just answer that, I think that this is, some things are kind of self-enforcing. I mean, I think what happened with this house involved no enforcement action at all, that someone was paying attention to what the law was, and in seeking to be in compliance with the law, communicated that, as I think a realtor is, I mean, I believe realtors are, there's.
No, we tracked him down.
Okay, okay.
They didn't proactively.
Okay.
No.
But, I think what we see currently is billboards that advertise the investment, like it's an open secret, it's that you can do it, and I think it would work the reverse way, which is realtors would know there was a law here, and I believe it would be incumbent upon them to communicate that to the buyer and seller, so.
Well, they do have a legal obligation.
Yeah.
I agree with Ms. Webster. One of my big things, and probably more on HAPC than planning, is, I hate to say the lack of teeth, but I'm concerned because we have some realtors, some developers, some builders who do what they're supposed to, and then we have other people a block away who are like, it's okay, I'm not going to do it. So kind of that disparity. Now, the one nice thing is, until the city can get this up and running and amicable, I think, and I'm not encouraging gray area, but whether someone's technically violating it or not, as long as they're being amicable and things, they're probably not going to get tattled on. So I think that this is one of those where, I mean, there might be things on the borderline of a regulation where people are doing it right, they're respectful, the people are, and it's not a problem to those. So I also think that, to Dr. Prithridge's point, the things that probably are of concern will self-regulate themselves, and the other ones can catch up. So I'm hopeful of that. I also want to thank Mr. McCarthy. He had some really good observations. I mean, we do have this cat and mouse game in town where I just think of, God, I don't even want to count how many years I've been on planning and how many things have come in front of us and been proposed and never been built. So I think, he does have a great observation of, we also, another part of the puzzle is we have to build and encourage building of new and affordable and different houses. But I think we've, for years, and Mr. Perry's office has really worked to kind of right the ship, but we've been too busy chasing how people use the existing inventory. And I think as things are starting to come into line, we know where and what and how we want to build in the future. So I hope his observation and nudge is correct, because I mean, right now, we have 1 in-process build and 3 that are, on paper ago. So, but other than that, I agree with Ms. Webster on the hesitation, but I think you did a great job.
We just clarify, if we were, however we vote, it is to say that the zoning rewrite is approved by the planning commission, and then what happens?
There'd be 2 readings at city council. The first reading would be more of an open discussion, is this good or not? What are the pros and cons? And then if there's no issues that need followed up on by staff, then the second reading would be the vote, and it would just be automatically the next meeting. So it would be probably early September, around the same time that the moratorium would end, unless council wanted to extend it.
It would take that long?
Well, the first and second reading, we normally don't put it on the council because council's next week.
Yeah.
So it
Oh,
would be
yeah, duh, okay.
second
Gotcha.
meeting in August and then September 3rd. so.
Yeah, we're just shy of middle of July, sorry. I'm in denial, it's still April for me.
Does that answer Ms. Webster's question?
Yeah, and then,
So the motion was to approve it as presented.
okay, with
Yeah.
the language, and just one last question, which is the 90 days, is that exactly what Louisville is doing, 90 days?
No, I don't think so. The 90 days is already in our code.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been that way.
So we're amending the section where the 90 days is already listed, but we're just adding the primary residence requirement
Gotcha.
for the
Okay.
zoning districts that are
Okay.
kind of those suburban districts.
That makes it much
Yeah.
easier. Thank you.
Did we reach out to, oh, sorry.
I can, on the days, 90 days, communities are all over the place on this. I mean, this is, you can read articles over this, the evolution I think that ultimately, if there were ever a legal challenge, I think that even our Ohio Supreme Court would defer to home rule because of the unique situation. And then with all the studies nationwide that are shown on the challenges of affordable housing, I think that where you see the 30-day, 90-day come into play is that trying to balance the other side of the equation of affordable housing, which is, yeah, it's kind of a home occupation, owner occupied, you can generate some revenue to offset the cost of the housing, make it more affordable for you individually rather than purely an investment property.
Yeah.
So to me, this is just it's a function of what Oxford as a community believes is appropriate. The benchmark was 90 days by previous, by what was already in the code, so leave that alone, and there's the ability to go back and revisit it. And I would bet that this conversation is not done, no matter what happens here tonight and what council does.
Okay, thank you, that's really helpful.
And I was just gonna ask, we borrowed some of the language from Louisville. Did we talk to Louisville about whether they're happy with what they've had and seen so far?
I believe we did several years ago when we did the original drafting, but not recently with the primary residence.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to know.
Yeah.
Not that that's an official statement, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a good comment.
We could call Louisville as well. Two Louisvilles. Love you guys.
All right, any other comments?
Do you want to talk about the zoning districts, the mile square or not?
I would like to say something. Yeah, thank you.
Go for it.
Yeah, I just feel like, regardless of the fact that there is a lot of rental properties there, it just feels to me like a whole lot of changes could happen to the mile square in general to make it more available for long-term residents to live there. And so, sorry. And so it just feels to me like there is an opportunity to help with affordable housing in the mile square as well. Because even if right now there isn't like this, there isn't this idea that it's needed as much because it's all rental. I don't know that it needs to stay all rental. And I see like, for instance, in the northwest corner of the mile square, that there's more families trying to live there. And so it feels like excluding the mile square is kind of against the point, because if we're really just trying to increase housing stock through this kind of thing, then why not? Why not do the whole city?
So I don't disagree with you, but previous planning and city rezoning basically gave up the eastern half of the mile square to different zoning. So, but the other thing too, and I don't disagree with you, but one of the nice safeties of the mile square right now is I bet you dollars to donuts, all those leases do not allow people to do Airbnb or sublet, and if a landlord sees that, I mean, there's a couple layers of that cake that are different in the mile square for a rental.
I think there's a significant number of these are in the mile square. I think that some of our property owners have gotten into this business.
I was talking more about like the above restaurant
Yeah.
rentals. I can guarantee those landlords are not exactly.
So, yeah, to me, like, part of me, displacement can be, I mean, I would like our houses to be housing people, whether they're renting or whether they're owners. And so, to me, like, I am particularly worried about the owner-occupied neighborhoods, but I also am worried about houses that sit vacant 90% of the time, and then a few weekends. And, like, I think we have a housing crunch on the mile square side, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and so I think that it's, I'm trying to see a reason why we would basically want to throw the mile square to the wolves on this, or are we not equally concerned about?
I think the Wolves ate it a couple years ago.
No, but that's
it's-
not true.
And it's not, and where it is today is not necessarily where it could be, and so I think if we care about the mile square, and this would be one thing that would be another reason that, it would.
I don't disagree with that, but former council members and I have had discussions about owner occupancy tax rebates, and well, like I mentioned, HAPC next week, we're gonna talk about a property that's been vacant most of the decade I've lived in town. So again, I don't disagree with the concept and where we could go, but I think the bigger problem with Uptown and some of the, I mean, 45 East has been vacant for at least 5 years, the bookstore for 6 or more. They tore down the BP and it was a field. which
that's
was-
Can I back up a minute though on that, because now you've said it twice. So the Miles Square is not uptown. The Miles Square is huge and
I
has
understand
like
that.
hundreds and hundreds of places to live in it.
I understand that, but we have an empty theater.
And then we also didn't like give away the east side of the Miles Square. We were trying to make it so the west side would be more attractive again to families.
But we never followed up with any
But we
protections.
never followed up with any of
No,
that.
yeah.
So right. So what I'm saying is like, it does feel kind of like throwing it to the wolves. We don't need to be doing that. And so that's where I came up with, and thanks Dave for prodding me, because I do feel strongly that we don't have to exclude the Miles Square.
Well, and most of the Mile Square is technically Miami, so, yes, sir.
I think something we could look into,
Yeah,
rather
for
than
another
creating
day.
a few thousand nonconformities in the Mile Square, is we could look at just a couple small areas, a couple pockets, like Shauna was talking about, northwest, southwest. Maybe there may be not very many rental properties there now, because most of the, we'll say, eastern 3/4 of the Mile Square already have rental permits, which means they could already do what we're talking about tonight. And so if we say you can't do that, that may not hold up very well in certain situations, because we've knowingly created so many nonconformities. But if we carve out a couple areas and not use zoning districts between X street and X street, between these blocks, we could say, well, we're gonna apply it there, but not the rest. So we could look at that as a later amendment potentially, and maybe that would address this potential concern in the future.
So how would it create nonconformities?
Because if they have existing rental permits,
Okay.
we don't know how many days per year they're using them, where they are, and if they're primary residences or not. They're probably not. Most of the Mile Square is not primary residences. So that would mean that if they're renting it on a short-term basis at all, then it would be a nonconformity if you decided to recommend it for those areas,
And it may impact subleasing.
possibly.
Yeah, that seems like a concern. So the idea is here that even though most of them are rented most of the year as a normal rental, that if they use it all over the summer, for example,
Yes.
then it immediately violates
They're
it.
allowed
Yeah.
to continue doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just a final technical question for me then. The rental permits is like a nonconformity sounds like that's like a zoning thing that runs with the land. But are these rental permits, like, do they run with the land? Or if someone buys
Yes,
themselves
they
a
do.
house, okay, they would?
Yeah,
Okay.
as long as there's not a gap. So
Okay.
the new owner has to put it in their name.
Okay.
And if they don't, then it would go away.
Or if there was like if you tore down a house and built a new
Right.
one,
Right.
or PUD or anything.
So no, it
like
doesn't
that.
run with the land in the sense of like a variance, but it
Yeah.
runs with the building.
Okay, as long as it's
As
maintained.
long as the building is, as long as
And
it's
renewed, but if
maintained.
you dropped it, it would be,
Right.
okay.
Yep.
I mean, a way around this is if specifically the issue comes up because we have a school year and it's rented out during that, you might have gaps that get filled. You could write in that if it's rented for a certain period of time, then it doesn't apply to the remaining time that it wouldn't be occupied. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Not that we should write this in now, but like, if that's the issue we're concerned about.
It's just hard to monitor when you get into
Oh,
that
of
level.
course.
Well, the other thing is then you.
All this is.
Then you create a disparity because then if I rent my house in an overlay district and I'm compliant for part of the year, I can't use my property the same way as they can, but
But
all other
that's already
conditions are
true.
the same.
You're not allowed to do a B&B because of the traffic and the nuisance. That's
No,
why
but
I
what I'm
was like-
saying is if I were to move to Florida and rent my house to somebody for 8 months as a college student, then
But I
there may
don't-
be.
No, I understand that, but like, it would, I mean, we have it in place already, like what you would do in that case, like.
My point would be is the spirit of it would still match it. We have somebody who's earnestly living there for a long period as opposed to weekends, months, whatever. Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess that, like, currently it carves out the mile square. I mean, I guess I would like to just, I mean, I understand why you did that. I think, and I don't think we're gonna solve it tonight, but I think that I'm with Mix Roseburg that, like, I'm not ready to give up entirely on the mile square and hate to, like, and I want to remove any burden to people moving back in. So I guess if between now and council you could think about what that might look like, it may not be part of this code, but if we had a clear idea of what that would be, I would like to see that. Because, I mean, some of these conversions are, I know specifically, are on those few parts of the mile square that we were still naively hoping to hold on to, even though we didn't do anything to preserve them, like in the Northwest Mile Square. But this is a real displacement machine if let run. And so anyway, if we could just come back to that, and if you have some thoughts on how that might apply strategically in the Mile Square, I'd appreciate it.
It's also, I know there's one phantom zone, and you know I never remember the name of the zone, but that also allows residential.
Neighborhood.
The neighborhood
business.
business district. So that one also wouldn't be included.
With one poor little place in town that can't be built on.
But this is let not the perfect be the enemy of the good. You know, I think this is good. It may not be perfect, but it's a lot better. And if we need justification again in the decision standards, I really do believe this clarifies the intent of our existing code.
We could build off it. Also, it'd be nice to see how it plays out before we move forward, trying to get into the mile square at all.
My role is not to influence policy discussion, so this is not the purpose of my statement. It's more to layer in something that I think is factually relevant. I was kind of shocked because I'm an old dad, so, my memories of college were when student rentals were literally just for the school year. So when my kids got back to school, one at UC and one here, all the leases are for 12 months. So it's not as if there's a gap there. So what I struggle with when I look at that is say, okay, well, you're gonna have these kids then sublet. There is sublet language in some of the leases that I've read, but it requires landlord approval and consent. And so I just layer that in there to say, I don't know how you'd figure all of that out, which then gets to my law director hat on of, gosh, we're struggling to enforce regular zoning code or probably rental regulations right now. I think that with some of the hires that have been made, there's going to be a way to multitask, repurpose some of those resources to accomplish the goals that we want. But we have to be realistic as well from this side of the equation where we've got to enforce, and Sam's calling me and Zach, and we're talking about what we need to do, because that is where you get into the real cost and time and energy, because you're taking enforcement actions that have legal implications to them and have to be done right.
And that's a bigger picture issue that transcends this. I mean, it touches on historic preservation. It's a problem we got to work out, because if our code is functionally unenforceable, we got to do something about that. But that's not for us to solve tonight. So.
Agreed, although, as you've said earlier, there is some efficacy in just having a law, because some people will follow it and other people will take their chances. And my point, yeah.
All right.
Well, yeah, just,
Any closing comments at 9:45? We're nowhere near the record, so don't get excited.
never mind.
No.
I
You got
was,
an hour and 14 minutes. Or actually, I'm sorry, an hour and 17 minutes.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe, I know this came up in a previous conversation about this issue, which is penalties, financial penalties for failing to adhere to this, which is not what zoning does, I understand it, but just something to think about, that there might be some income generated for non-compliance with this zoning resolution.
Which ideally would convert to permit revenue for compliance, so.
Yeah, anyway, that's just a
All right,
sidebar.
so we have a motion on the table and a second. Any further discussion?
Well,
Seeing none?
What I would like, no, what I would like to do, I would like to do, because I think Sam, I would like to be a little more explicit in our record of the decision standards, because I think Sam's kind of, well, it could be go one way or the other. If this were to enter into a legal environment, I would like to strengthen some of the decision standards, because that's the rationale for why we do it. And so, like, I think Sam's are, they're good, but I think that, so some of the things that if you wouldn't mind, Chair, that we go through just the decision standards.
Well, we only have to meet one of the decision
Okay.
standards. So, I mean, we can go through them, but I would, in the interest of time and just simplicity, if anybody sees that none of the 5 are met on page 17, I mean, I see at least 3 that are met.
Solidly.
Yeah.
I would
Well,
agree.
and this is, I mean, if we were gonna take 5 minutes to do it, if we got sued over this, we wouldn't regret the 5 minutes that we articulated.
I don't
the-
need
the
5
purpose.
minutes. It clarifies the intent of the code, health and safety and general welfare, and better implement the intent of the code. Those are the 3 that quickly came off.
Mr. Kennard, is that enough to say that they do, or should we say how that they do?
I had page 6, I had statements for all of them.
Okay.
So you could just, if you wanted to agree with.
I think you can adopt what the staff recommendation was and the grounds to
Okay.
do it as part of that.
Okay.
Adopt the staff report as to the rationale.
The other layer of the cake is it's going to council twice, so as far as we're concerned, there is no legal implication because there would have been triple review or double review on the initial vote.
Well, like I say, I think to justifying why you adopt legislation can help you later, but I think we've articulated it. If I were to clarify, I would just say that under C and D, that the original code was meant for these things to be accessory uses secondary to the principal use. And this makes that explicitly clear that a primary residence is the principal use of the residential structure, and this remains secondary and supplemental.
And it's been made explicit through several meetings already.
Yeah, so that to me is like clarified, close the loophole in the code, in
Well-
addition to all those other good standards that you've listed.
Even, just to add to that for your peace of mind, for B, you could just pick out safety. Having an idea of what's going on, where it's going on, whether from a regulatory or law enforcement, fire, whatever the case may be, that improves the welfare and safety of the city. So,
There you go.
Comprehensive plan in terms of housing.
Yeah.
all right. Seeing no further discussion, Mr. Perry, will you call the roll? Point of clarification, not that I need to. This is to approve as presented, which will go to council for 2 readings.
And you have the motion and the second already?
Yes.
Okay. All right, start with Ms. Webster again.
Yes.
Ms. Rosenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mr. Pritchard,
Yes.
Mr. Watt.
Yes. All right, having run out of things to talk about on the agenda, I'll
Move to adjourn.
entertain a, wow, that was really good. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, motion and a second. There's no discussion on a motion to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Seeing none, we are adjourned.
I tried to.